Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the crunch of dead leaves beneath my boots echoed through the dense canopy of the Ozark National Forest. I paused, inhaling deeply, savoring the earthy aroma that permeated the air. As an entomologist, I'd visited countless forests, but something about this place felt different. A shiver ran down my spine, though the afternoon sun still warmed the air. "Get a grip, Amanda," I muttered to myself, adjusting the straps of my backpack. "It's just another research trip." But even as the words left my lips, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a curious deer or perhaps a watchful owl. Instead, I was met with nothing but the gently swaying trees and the occasional fluttering of leaves in the breeze. I pushed on, my mind racing with the possibilities that lay ahead. This expedition was supposed to be routine, collect soil samples, catalog any interesting insect species, and head back to the lab. But as I ventured deeper into the forest, the usual sounds of wildlife began to fade, replaced by an unsettling silence. "Hello?" I called out, immediately feeling foolish. Who did I expect to answer? The trees? My voice seemed to be swallowed by the forest, leaving no echo. The silence pressed in around me, making the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I quickened my pace, eager to reach the clearing where I planned to set up my equipment. As I walked, I couldn't help but recall the conversation I'd had with my colleague, Dr. Harriet Chen, just before leaving for this trip. "Amanda, are you sure you want to go alone?" Harriet had asked, concern etched on her face. "The Ozarks can be tricky, especially for solo researchers." I had laughed off her worries. "Harriet, I've been doing this for years. Besides, it's just a few days of sample collection. What could possibly go wrong?" Now, as the silence of the forest enveloped me, Harriet's words echoed in my mind. I shook my head, trying to dispel the creeping unease. I was a scientist, for crying out loud. There was no room for superstition or unfounded fears in my work. Finally, I reached the small clearing I had marked on my map. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. I set down my backpack and began to unpack my equipment: sample containers, a trowel, gloves, and my trusty field journal. "All right," I said aloud, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet forest. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding." I knelt on the soft earth, my fingers hovering just above the soil. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The ground seemed to hum with an energy I'd never encountered before. Shaking off the sensation, I pulled on my gloves and picked up the trowel. As I began to dig, the silence of the forest was broken by a soft rustling. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but as I continued to work, the sound grew louder. I paused, listening intently. It seemed to be coming from beneath me. "What the hell?" I muttered, leaning closer to examine the soil. That's when I saw it. The earth itself was moving, ever so slightly. Tiny particles of soil shifted and swirled as if alive. My heart began to race as I realized what I was seeing. Or rather, what I thought I was seeing. "Impossible," I whispered, my scientific mind rebelling against what my eyes were telling me. I reached out, my gloved hand trembling as it hovered over the writhing earth. Just as my fingertips were about to make contact, the ground beneath me heaved. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The earth where I had been kneeling moments before began to rise, forming a small mound. Then, in a sight that would forever be etched in my memory, the mound burst open. Thousands, no, millions, of tiny insects poured forth from the earth. They moved with a synchronicity I had never seen before, their bodies forming intricate, ever-changing patterns. I watched, transfixed, as they flowed across the forest floor like a living river. "This can't be happening," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't possible." But it was happening, right before my eyes. The insects, a species I couldn't even begin to identify, continued to emerge from the earth. They moved with purpose, as if guided by some unseen intelligence. I fumbled for my camera, desperate to document what I was seeing. As I raised it to my eye, the insects suddenly froze. Every single one of them stopped moving at precisely the same moment. Then, as one, they turned towards me. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that they were reacting to my presence. But how? How could they possibly be aware of me? "Hello?" I said, feeling ridiculous even as the word left my mouth. "Can you understand me?" The mass of insects began to move again, this time forming a distinct shape. My jaw dropped as I watched them arrange themselves into what could only be described as a face. It was crude and constantly shifting, but undeniably a face. And then I heard it. A whisper, so faint I thought I might have imagined it. But no, there it was again. A voice, not in my ears, but somehow inside my mind. "Amanda," the voice whispered, sending shivers down my spine. How did they know my name? I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. My mind reeled, unable to process what was happening. This defied everything I knew about insect behavior, about biology, about the very nature of consciousness itself. As quickly as it had appeared, the face in the insects dissolved. The living carpet began to retreat, disappearing back into the earth from which it had emerged. Within moments, the forest floor looked normal again, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. I stood there, my camera forgotten in my hands, staring at the now still earth. My legs felt weak, and I sank to my knees, my mind struggling to make sense of what I had just witnessed. "This changes everything," I whispered to the silent forest. As the implications of what I had seen began to sink in, I knew that my life would never be the same. I had stumbled upon something extraordinary, something that would challenge our understanding of life itself. With shaking hands, I reached for my field journal. I had to document this, had to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. As I began to write, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever I had encountered here in the Ozarks, whatever intelligence lay beneath the earth, I knew one thing for certain. I had to understand it. Little did I know that this discovery would set in motion a chain of events that would not only change my life, but potentially the fate of our entire species. As I sat there scribbling furiously in my journal, the forest around me seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. The adventure had only just begun. I stared at the writhing mass of insects beneath my feet, my mind reeling. The forest floor had transformed into a living, breathing entity, composed of countless tiny bodies moving in perfect unison. My scientific brain struggled to process what my eyes were witnessing. "This can't be real," I muttered, rubbing my eyes furiously. But when I looked again, the scene remained unchanged. The insects, if you could call them that, were unlike anything I'd ever encountered in my years as an entomologist. Their bodies seemed to shimmer and change color as they moved, creating a hypnotic effect that made my head spin. I took a tentative step backward, and the entire mass rippled in response. My heart pounded in my chest, a primal fear taking hold despite my scientific curiosity. "Okay, Amanda," I said to myself, trying to steady my nerves. "You're a scientist. Observe, document, don't panic." I reached for my camera with trembling hands, determined to capture evidence of this phenomenon. As I raised the device to my eye, the insect mass suddenly froze, as if sensing my intention. "Oh, come on," I groaned. "Don't be camera shy now." As if in response to my words, the creatures began to move again, this time with even greater purpose. They flowed across the forest floor like a liquid, forming intricate patterns that seemed to pulsate with life. I snapped photo after photo, my scientific mind finally kicking into gear. "Remarkable," I breathed, zooming in on a particularly complex formation. "The level of coordination is unprecedented. It's almost as if they're..." My voice trailed off as the realization hit me. They were communicating, not just with each other, but with me. The insects began to coalesce, rising up from the ground in a column that reached my eye level. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a tree root in my haste to put some distance between myself and the swarm. "Stay back," I shouted, knowing how ridiculous I sounded. Since when did insects respond to verbal commands? But to my utter astonishment, the column stopped its advance. It hovered there, swaying slightly, as if waiting for something. Waiting for me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry with fear and excitement. "Can you understand me?" I asked, feeling both foolish and exhilarated. The column of insects rippled and then began to change shape. I watched, transfixed, as it morphed into a crude approximation of a human face. The features were constantly shifting, composed of thousands of tiny bodies in constant motion, but the overall effect was undeniable. And then I heard it. A voice, not in my ears, but somehow inside my mind. "Amanda," it whispered, the sound sending shivers down my spine. I clasped my hands over my ears even though I knew it was futile. The voice was coming from inside my head. "This isn't happening," I said aloud, squeezing my eyes shut. "I'm hallucinating. Maybe I ate some bad berries or something." When I opened my eyes again, the face was still there, watching me with eyeless sockets that somehow managed to convey an intense curiosity. What are you?" I asked, my scientific training finally overcoming my fear. The face shifted, the insects rearranging themselves into a new pattern. This time, they formed a series of symbols that looked vaguely like hieroglyphics. They changed too quickly for me to make sense of them, but I had the distinct impression that they were trying to communicate complex ideas. "I'm sorry," I said, shaking my head. "I don't understand." The face reappeared, and this time the voice in my mind was clearer. "We are many," it said, the words coming in fits and starts, as if it was struggling to translate its thoughts into human language. "We are one." I nodded slowly, my mind racing to keep up with the implications of what I was witnessing. "A hive mind," I murmured, "a collective consciousness. But how? And why here?" The insect face didn't respond to my questions. Instead, it began to change shape again, this time forming a rough map of the forest. A specific area pulsed with light, and I realized it was showing me a location. "You want me to go there?" I asked, pointing to the glowing spot. The face nodded, the movement jerky and unnatural. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this impossible phenomenon as I could. But the scientist in me, the part that had always pushed me to seek out the unknown, was impossible to ignore. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Lead the way." The insect mass collapsed back to the ground, forming a path through the underbrush. I followed, my heart pounding with each step. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. As we walked, or rather, as I walked and the insects flowed, I tried to make sense of what was happening. "Are you native to this forest?" I asked. The voice in my mind responded, its words clearer now. "We have always been here, waiting, watching, learning." "Learning what?" I pressed, fascinated despite my fear. "Everything," came the reply. We reached a small clearing and the insect mass surged forward, coalescing into a large mound in the center. I approached cautiously, my scientific curiosity warring with my survival instinct. The mound began to shift and change, forming into a structure that looked disturbingly like a throne. And seated upon it was a figure composed entirely of the shimmering insects. "Holy shit," I breathed, unable to contain my awe. The figure raised a hand, and I felt a presence brush against my mind stronger than before. Images flooded my consciousness, flashes of ancient forests, of civilizations rising and falling, of a world where insects ruled and humans were nothing but a distant possibility. I staggered under the mental onslaught, falling to my knees. "Stop," I gasped. "It's too much." The visions ceased immediately, and I looked up to see the insect figure regarding me with what I could only describe as concern. "We did not mean to harm," the voice in my mind said. "We forget the fragility of individual minds." I stood on shaky legs, brushing dirt from my knees. "What are you?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure on the throne seemed to consider the question. "We are the memory of the earth," it said finally. "We are the keepers of secrets long forgotten by your kind." I shook my head, struggling to comprehend. "But why reveal yourselves now? Why to me?" The insect figure stood, its body constantly shifting and reforming. "Because the time has come," it said, its mental voice tinged with what I could only describe as urgency. "The balance is shifting. The old agreements are failing." "What agreements?" I asked, feeling like I was falling down a rabbit hole of cosmic proportions. But before the figure could answer, a new sound cut through the forest, the whump, whump, whump of helicopter blades. The insect figure dissolved instantly, the entire mass disappearing into the earth in a matter of seconds. "Wait!" I cried out. "Don't go!" But they were gone, leaving me alone in the clearing as the sound of the helicopter grew louder. I looked up through the canopy to see a black shape hovering overhead, a spotlight cutting through the trees. As the light found me, pinning me in its harsh glare, I realized that my life had just become infinitely more complicated. Whatever I had stumbled upon here in the Ozarks, it was clear that I wasn't the only one interested in it. The helicopter began to descend, and I steeled myself for what was to come. I had a feeling that my conversation with the insect intelligence was just the beginning of a much larger and potentially more dangerous adventure. As the wind from the rotors whipped around me, I clenched my fists, determined to protect the secret I had uncovered. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. The world as I knew it would never be the same again. The fluorescent lights of my research station hummed incessantly, a sound that usually faded into the background but now seemed to drill into my skull. I hunched over my desk, surrounded by scattered notes, soil samples, and blurry photographs that seemed to mock me with their inadequacy. "It was real," I muttered, rubbing my bloodshot eyes. "I know what I saw." But doubt gnawed at me like a hungry rat. The events in the forest seemed more like a fever dream with each passing hour. The government agents who had intercepted me after the helicopter landing had been frustratingly vague, asking questions but offering no explanations. A knock at the door startled me from my reverie. "Come in," I called, hastily shuffling my notes into a semblance of order. Dr. Harriet Chen, my colleague and friend, stepped into the cluttered office. Her eyes widened as she took in my disheveled appearance. "Amanda, you look like hell. Have you slept at all?" I shook my head, gesturing to the mess on my desk. "How can I sleep, Harriet? I'm so close to something big here, I can feel it." Harriet sighed, pulling up a chair. "Close to what exactly?" "Amanda, you've been holed up in here for days, barely eating, hardly speaking to anyone. We're all worried about you." I leaned back in my chair, studying Harriet's concerned face. Could I trust her with the truth? The whole unbelievable truth? "Harriet," I began, choosing my words carefully, "what if I told you I discovered something in the Ozarks that could change everything we know about insect behavior? About consciousness itself?" Harriet's eyebrows shot up. "That's quite a claim, Amanda. What exactly did you find?" I took a deep breath and launched into my story, describing the living carpet of insects, the face they had formed, the voice in my mind. As I spoke, Harriet's expression shifted from concern to disbelief to outright skepticism. When I finished, silence hung heavy in the air. Harriet cleared her throat. "Amanda, I don't know what to say. Are you sure you didn't imagine this? Stress, isolation, it can play tricks on the mind." I slammed my hand on the desk, causing Harriet to jump. "Damn it, Harriet, I know what I saw. I'm not crazy." "I didn't say you were crazy," Harriet said softly. but you have to admit it sounds far-fetched. Telepathic insects? A collective consciousness? It goes against everything we know about entomology. I slumped in my chair, the fight draining out of me. I know how it sounds, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm on the verge of something monumental, something that could change the world. Harriet reached out, placing a comforting hand on my arm. Look, why don't you get some rest? A good night's sleep might help you see things more clearly. I nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of my exhaustion. Maybe you're right. I'll try to get some sleep. Harriet stood, relief evident on her face. Good. We'll talk more tomorrow, okay? Try not to worry too much. As she left, closing the door behind her, I couldn't help but feel a pang of loneliness. I was alone with my incredible secret, and the burden of it was crushing. I made my way to the small cot in the corner of my office, not bothering to change out of my rumpled clothes. As soon as my head hit the pillow, exhaustion overwhelmed me, and I fell into a deep sleep. But my rest was far from peaceful. In my dreams, I found myself back in the Ozark forest. The trees loomed impossibly tall, their branches weaving together to form a living canopy that blocked out the sky. The ground beneath my feet pulsed with life, millions of tiny bodies moving in perfect synchronicity. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the dream forest. "Are you there?" A whisper answered, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Amanda, we need you." I spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice. "What do you need? How can I help?" The forest floor began to ripple, and a figure rose from the writhing mass of insects. It was humanoid in shape, but its features were constantly shifting, composed of countless tiny bodies. "The balance is shifting," the figure said, its voice resonating in my mind. "The old agreements are failing. You must protect us." "Protect you from what?" I asked, frustration coloring my voice. "I don't understand." The figure reached out a hand, its arm elongating impossibly. As it touched my forehead, a flood of images assaulted my mind. I saw vast underground networks, pulsing with life and information. I saw humans in lab coats, conducting terrible experiments. I saw swarms of insects, weaponized and unleashed upon unsuspecting populations. I jerked awake with a gasp, my heart pounding. The images from my dream lingered, feeling more like memories than figments of my imagination. I glanced at the clock, 3:27 a.m. "Just a dream," I muttered, trying to calm my racing pulse. It was just a dream. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The voice in my dream had been the same one I'd heard in the forest. They were trying to contact me again. I stumbled to my desk, flicking on the lamp. My eyes fell on the pile of classified documents I'd managed to swipe during my escape from the government facility. I hadn't had the courage to look at them yet, but now, with trembling hands, I opened the first folder. As I read, my eyes widened in horror. The documents detailed a top-secret program aimed at harnessing insect intelligence for military purposes. Codenamed Project Hive, it spoke of experiments, of attempts to control and weaponize the very beings I had encountered. "Oh my God," I breathed, the implications hitting me like a physical blow. A soft scratching sound made me freeze. It was coming from the window. Slowly, I turned to look. The glass was covered in insects, hundreds of them, forming a familiar pattern. A face. "Amanda," the voice in my mind said, clearer than ever before. "We don't have much time. They're coming." I stood on shaky legs, approaching the window. "Who's coming? What do you want me to do?" "Protect the secret," the voice urged. "Find the others. The fate of two worlds depends on it." Before I could ask any more questions, the insects dispersed, vanishing into the night as quickly as they had appeared. For a moment I stood there, my mind reeling. Then, spurred by a sudden sense of urgency, I began to move. I grabbed my backpack, stuffing it with the classified documents, my research notes, and a few essential supplies. As I worked, a plan began to form in my mind. I couldn't stay here. It was only a matter of time before someone connected the dots and came for me. I needed to go off the grid, to find a way to continue my research in secret. Just as I was about to leave, my eyes fell on a framed photo on my desk. It showed me and Harriet at a conference last year, both of us smiling and carefree. I felt a pang of regret. I couldn't involve her in this. It was too dangerous. I scribbled a quick note. Harriet, I'm sorry. I have to go. Please don't look for me. I'll explain everything when I can. Stay safe. Amanda. With one last look around the office that had been my home for so many years, I slipped out into the dark hallway. The research station was quiet, most of my colleagues long gone for the night. As I made my way to the parking lot, my mind raced with questions. Who were the others the insects had mentioned? How was I supposed to protect a secret I barely understood? And what did they mean by 2 worlds? I reached my car and tossed my backpack onto the passenger seat. As I started the engine, I caught movement in my rearview mirror. A black SUV was pulling into the lot, its headlights off. My heart jumped into my throat. Somehow I knew they were here for me. Without hesitation, I threw the car into gear and peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing. The SUV's engine roared to life behind me, giving chase. As I sped into the night, the enormity of what I was doing hit me. I was leaving behind everything I knew, running from my own government, all to protect a secret I didn't fully understand. But deep down, I knew I had no choice. Whatever was happening, whatever role I had to play in it, one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The open road stretched before me, dark and full of unknowns. But for the first time in days, I felt a sense of purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them. The adventure had truly begun. The headlights of my battered Subaru cut through the darkness as I navigated the winding roads back to the Ozark National Forest. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white, and every shadow made me flinch, expecting government agents to materialize at any moment. You're doing the right thing, Amanda, I muttered to myself, trying to quell the rising panic in my chest. You're not crazy. You're not a traitor. You're protecting something important. The forest loomed ahead, a wall of darkness that seemed to swallow the road. I pulled off onto a hidden dirt track I'd discovered during my previous expedition, killing the headlights and relying on moonlight to guide me. After a few tense minutes, I reached a small clearing and cut the engine. Silence enveloped me, broken only by the gentle ticking of the cooling engine and the distant calls of night birds. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Okay, I whispered. I'm here. Now what? As if in response, a soft rustling sound emanated from the forest floor. I grabbed my backpack and stepped out of the car, my heart pounding as I watched the ground begin to move. Thousands of insects emerged from the earth, their bodies glinting in the moonlight. They formed intricate patterns, swirling around my feet but never quite touching me. I stood transfixed, equal parts terrified and awestruck. Hello again, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I came back, like you asked. The insects coalesced into a vaguely humanoid shape, and the now familiar voice echoed in my mind. Amanda, you have questions. We have answers. But first you must see. The figure gestured towards the depths of the forest, and I felt an overwhelming urge to follow. Swallowing my fear, I nodded and began to walk, the insect swarm guiding my path. As we delved deeper into the woods, the air grew thick with an otherworldly energy. The trees seemed to whisper, their leaves rustling in a wind I couldn't feel. After what felt like hours but could have been minutes, we reached a small clearing bathed in an eerie, pulsating light. In the center of the clearing stood what looked like a massive anthill, but unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It towered at least 15 feet high, its surface crawling with millions of insects that seemed to phase in and out of visibility. What is this place? I asked, my scientific curiosity overriding my fear. The insect figure turned to me, its features constantly shifting, This is a nexus, a point where our world touches yours. Here, we can show you the truth. Before I could respond, the ground beneath my feet began to glow. Geometric patterns etched themselves into the soil, forming complex equations and diagrams that hurt my eyes to look at directly. My God, I breathed, recognition dawning. These are advanced mathematical concepts, quantum mechanics, theories of consciousness. How is this possible? We have existed for millions of years, the voice in my mind explained. We have observed, learned, evolved. What your kind is only beginning to understand, we have known for eons. I knelt down, my hand hovering over the glowing symbols. But why show me this? Why now? The insect figure seemed to sigh, a sound like rustling leaves. Because the balance is shifting. Humans have discovered our existence, but they do not understand. They seek to control, to weaponize. If they succeed, both our worlds will suffer. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the classified documents I'd stolen. Project Hive, I said. They're trying to harness your intelligence for military purposes. Yes, the voice confirmed, but they do not realize the danger. Our consciousness is not meant to be controlled or divided. To do so would unleash chaos beyond imagining. I stood, my mind reeling with the implications. So what can I do? I'm just one person. How can I stop this? The insect figure approached me, its form rippling. You are more than you know, Amanda. You have a unique ability to bridge our worlds. With your help, we can find a way to coexist, to share knowledge without destruction. Suddenly, the clearing was bathed in harsh light. The whump, whump, whump of helicopter blades shattered the night's stillness. No, I gasped. They found us. How? The insect figure began to dissolve. We must protect the Nexus. You must go. Remember what you've seen. Find the others. Trust your instincts. Wait, I cried. I don't understand. Who are the others? But the figure was gone, the insects disappearing into the earth with impossible speed. I was left alone in the clearing as a voice boomed from above. This is the United States government. You are trespassing in a restricted area. Put your hands in the air and prepare to be detained. My heart raced as I weighed my options. I couldn't let them take me, couldn't let them access the knowledge I'd gained. With a silent apology to the insects, I turned and ran, plunging into the darkest part of the forest. Branches whipped at my face as I sprinted, the sound of pursuit close behind. My lungs burned, but fear and adrenaline pushed me forward. I had no idea where I was going, but something, instinct or perhaps something more, guided my steps. After what felt like an eternity, I burst out of the tree line and found myself at the edge of a cliff. Far below, a river snaked through the valley, its waters black in the moonlight. Stop right there, a gruff voice commanded. I turned to see a man in a dark suit emerging from the trees, gun aimed at my chest. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel the intensity of his gaze. Please, I said, raising my hands slowly. You don't understand what's happening. We need to protect them, not exploit them. The man took a step closer. Dr. Reynolds, you're in possession of classified information. Come with me now and we can sort this out. I shook my head, taking a small step backward. My heel met empty air, and I fought to maintain my balance. I can't do that. There's too much at stake. The man's grip on his gun tightened. Don't do anything stupid, Doctor. There's nowhere to go. In that moment, time seemed to slow. I heard the insect's voice in my mind, clear as day. Trust your instincts. Without allowing myself to think, I turned and leaped off the cliff. The man's shout of surprise was drowned out by the rush of wind as I plummeted towards the river. Just before I hit the water, I felt something impossible. Thousands of tiny bodies swarming around me, slowing my fall. I plunged into the icy river, the shock nearly causing me to gasp. But the insects were there, forming a protective cocoon around me as the current swept me away from my pursuers. As I was carried downstream, my mind raced with questions. Who were the others I needed to find? How could I hope to stop a secret government program? And most importantly, what had I truly become a part of? One thing was clear. My life as I knew it was over. I was now a fugitive caught between two worlds, with the fate of both possibly resting on my shoulders. As the river carried me into the unknown, I made a silent vow. I would find answers. I would protect the insects and their incredible knowledge. And somehow I would find a way to bridge the gap between our species before it was too late. The night enveloped me, and with it, the first chapter of my new life began. The first rays of dawn were breaking through the trees when I finally dragged myself out of the river. My clothes clung to me like a second skin, and every muscle in my body screamed in protest as I collapsed on the muddy bank. For a moment I just lay there, gulping in air and trying to process the events of the past few hours. "You're alive," I muttered to myself, running a hand over my face. Somehow, you're still alive. As if in response, I felt a tingling sensation across my skin. I looked down to see dozens of tiny insects crawling over me, their bodies glistening in the early morning light. They moved with purpose, seeming to assess my condition. "Thank you," I whispered, not entirely sure if they could understand me. "You saved my life back there." The insects formed a pattern on my arm, a simple spiral that pulsed briefly before they dispersed, disappearing into the surrounding vegetation. I took it as a sign of acknowledgement. Groaning, I pushed myself to my feet and took stock of my surroundings. The river had carried me several miles downstream, far from the clearing where I'd encountered the government agents. But I knew I couldn't afford to relax. They'd be searching for me, and I had to keep moving. I reached for my backpack, relieved to find it still securely strapped to my back. The waterproof material had done its job. The classified documents and my research notes were damp but legible. As I rifled through the contents, my hand brushed against something unfamiliar. Frowning, I pulled out a small, metallic object about the size of a coin. It was covered in intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to shift as I looked at them. I had no memory of putting this in my bag. "What the hell are you?" I murmured, turning the object over in my hands. Suddenly, the patterns on the device began to glow with a soft blue light. A holographic display flickered to life above it, showing a map of the surrounding area. A pulsing red dot indicated my location, and a series of green dots appeared at various points on the map. My heart raced as I realized what I was looking at. "The others," I breathed. "This must be how I find them." A twig snapped in the forest behind me, and I whirled around, my body tensing for a fight. But instead of a government agent, I saw a young woman emerge from the trees. She was dressed in hiking gear, her long black hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her eyes widened as she saw me. "Oh my God," she gasped. "Are you okay? You look like you've been through hell." I hesitated, unsure whether to trust this stranger, but something about her felt familiar. Before I could respond, I noticed a faint shimmering around her, almost like an aura. Tiny insects, nearly invisible to the naked eye, swarmed around her in intricate patterns. "You're one of them," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "One of the others." The woman's expression changed from concern to wariness. "Who are you?" she demanded, taking a step back. "How do you know about that?" I held up my hands in a placating gesture. "My name is Dr. Amanda Reynolds. I'm an entomologist. I've been in contact with them. The insect intelligence." Her eyes narrowed, studying me intently. After a moment, she seemed to come to a decision. "I'm Zoe," she said, "and if what you're saying is true, we need to get out of here. Now." As if on cue, the distant sound of helicopter blades cut through the morning air. Zoe grabbed my arm, pulling me into the cover of the trees. "Come on," she hissed. "I know a place we can hide." We ran through the forest, ducking under low-hanging branches and leaping over fallen logs. Despite my exhaustion, I found myself keeping pace with Zoe, my body seeming to move with an unnatural grace and agility. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, we reached a small, well-hidden cave entrance. Zoe ushered me inside, then carefully arranged some brush to conceal the opening. The cave was cool and damp, lit by an eerie bioluminescent fungus that clung to the walls. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw that the cave was larger than it first appeared, stretching back into the darkness. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly. Zoe sat down on a flat rock, gesturing for me to do the same. "It's a safe haven," she explained, "one of many scattered across the country. We use them to hide from those who would exploit our connection." I sank down onto another rock, wincing as my battered body protested. "So, there are more of you? More people who can communicate with the insects?" Zoe nodded. "We call ourselves the Awakened. We're few in number, but growing. Each of us has a unique ability that manifests through our connection to the hive mind." "Hive mind," I repeated, the term sending a shiver down my spine. "That's what the government is after. Project Hive." Zoe's eyes widened. "You know about that? How?" I reached into my backpack and pulled out the classified documents, handing them to her. As she leafed through them, her expression grew increasingly grim. "This is worse than we thought," she muttered. "They're closer to weaponizing the hive mind than we realized." "But why?" I asked. "What could they possibly hope to gain?" Zoe looked up at me, her eyes intense. "Imagine an army that moves with perfect coordination, that can process information and adapt strategies in real time. Soldiers linked by a hive mind would be nearly unstoppable." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "My God," I breathed. "But from what I've seen, the hive mind isn't something that can be controlled or divided like that. The consequences could be catastrophic." Zoe nodded gravely. "Exactly. That's why we've been working to protect the secret, to find others like us who can help maintain the balance." A thought struck me. "The device," I said, pulling out the small metallic object. "This is how you find each other, isn't it?" Zoe's eyes widened as she saw the device. "Where did you get that? Those are incredibly rare." I shook my head. "I don't know. It just appeared in my bag. I think the insects might have given it to me." Zoe reached out, her fingers brushing against the device. As she touched it, the holographic display sprang to life again, this time showing a complex network of interconnected nodes. "This is incredible," Zoe murmured. "I've never seen one with this level of detail before. Amanda, do you realize what this means?" I shook my head, still struggling to process everything. "It means you're not just an observer anymore," Zoe explained. "You've been chosen. The hive mind has accepted you as one of us." The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy blanket. "But I'm not. I don't have any special abilities. I'm just a scientist." Zoe smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Are you sure about that? Think about how you escaped, how you've been moving through the forest. Haven't you noticed anything different?" As she spoke, I became acutely aware of the insects around us. I could sense them, not just with my eyes or ears, but with some new, impossible sense. I could feel their movements, their intentions, almost as if they were extensions of my own body. "Oh my God," I whispered, looking down at my hands in wonder. "What's happening to me?" Zoe stood, offering me her hand. "You're evolving, Amanda, and we need your help. The balance between our world and theirs is more fragile than ever. Will you join us?" I stared at her outstretched hand, my mind reeling with the implications of what she was offering. Everything I'd known, my entire life's work, had led me to this moment. I thought of the wonders I'd seen, the secrets I'd uncovered, and the dangers that loomed on the horizon. Taking a deep breath, I reached out and grasped Zoe's hand. "I'm in," I said, my voice steady despite the fear and excitement coursing through me. "What's our next move?" Zoe's smile widened. "Now," she said, "we find the others. and we prepare for the fight of our lives. As if in response to her words, the insects around us began to move with renewed purpose. I could feel their determination, their readiness for whatever challenges lay ahead. And for the first time since this wild journey began, I felt a sense of true belonging. The cave seemed to pulse with energy as Zoe and I began to plan our next steps. Outside, the world was changing, evolving in ways beyond imagination, and I was now at the very heart of it all. The cave hummed with an otherworldly energy as Zoe and I huddled over the holographic map projected by the mysterious device. Green dots pulsed at various locations across the country, each representing one of the awakened. "There are more of us than I realized," I murmured, my eyes tracing the intricate web of connections between the dots. Zoe nodded, her face illuminated by the soft blue glow. "We've been growing in number, but so have our enemies. The government isn't the only group after us." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" Before Zoe could answer, a low rumble echoed through the cave. Dust and small pebbles rained down from the ceiling as the ground beneath us shuddered. "Shit," Zoe hissed, shutting off the device. "They've found us. We need to move. Now." We scrambled to our feet, gathering our meager supplies. As we rushed towards the cave entrance, I felt a strange tingling sensation at the base of my skull. Suddenly, my vision blurred, and I was overwhelmed by a flood of sensory input. I could feel every insect within a mile radius, their movements, their intentions, and through their eyes, I saw what was coming for us. "Zoe, wait." I grabbed her arm, pulling her back from the entrance. "There's a team outside, heavily armed. They've got the cave surrounded." Zoe's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" I tapped the side of my head. "I can see through them. The insects. It's like I'm connected to all of them at once." A smile flickered across Zoe's face. "Your ability is manifesting. Good timing." Another tremor shook the cave, stronger this time. Cracks began to spiderweb across the ceiling. "They're using some kind of sonic weapon," I said, the knowledge coming to me through the hive mind. "Trying to flush us out or bury us alive." Zoe's expression hardened. "Not if I have anything to say about it." She closed her eyes, her face a mask of concentration. The air around us began to vibrate, and I watched in awe as thousands of insects poured into the cave from hidden crevices. They swarmed together, forming a living barrier across the entrance. "That won't hold them for long," Zoe said, her voice strained. "We need another way out." I closed my eyes, reaching out with my newfound senses. Through the collective awareness of the insects, I explored every inch of the cave system. "There," I said, pointing to a narrow fissure at the back of the cave. "It leads to an underground river. We might be able to squeeze through." Zoe nodded, sweat beading on her forehead as she maintained the insect barrier. "Lead the way." We made our way to the fissure, the sound of gunfire and shouting growing louder behind us. I went first, sucking in my breath as I squeezed through the narrow opening. Sharp rocks scraped against my skin, but I pushed on, driven by a desperate need to survive. After what felt like an eternity, the passage widened, and I found myself on a narrow ledge above an underground river. The roar of rushing water filled the cavern. "Zoe!" I called back. "We're through!" Moments later, Zoe emerged from the fissure looking battered but determined. "They've breached the entrance," she panted. "We don't have much time." A distant explosion rocked the cavern, sending a shower of rocks and debris into the river below. "We have to jump," I said, eyeing the churning water. "It's our only chance." Zoe nodded grimly. "Together?" I reached out and took her hand. "Together." We leapt from the ledge just as another explosion shook the cavern. The icy water hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. The current grabbed us, pulling us deeper into the earth. As we were swept along, I felt the presence of the hive mind grow stronger. The insects in the water formed a protective cocoon around us, guiding us through the treacherous underground rapids. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, We were spat out into a larger body of water. Gasping and spluttering, we swam to the shore of what appeared to be an underground lake. As we dragged ourselves onto the rocky beach, the magnitude of what had just happened hit me. I started to laugh, a hysterical edge to the sound. "We're alive," I gasped between bouts of laughter. "How the hell are we still alive?" Zoe managed a weak smile. "Welcome to life as one of the awakened. It's never dull." As our laughter subsided, I became aware of a soft, pulsing light emanating from deeper within the cavern. "Zoe," I whispered, "do you see that?" She nodded, her expression a mixture of awe and trepidation. "I've never seen anything like it." We stood, our bodies protesting after the ordeal we'd just been through, and made our way towards the light. As we drew closer, I realized the glow was coming from a vast network of bioluminescent fungi that covered the walls and ceiling of the cavern. But it wasn't just beautiful. It was alive with information. Patterns flowed through the network, reminiscent of the equations and diagrams I'd seen in the forest clearing. "It's some kind of data storage system," I breathed, reaching out to touch the glowing fungi. As my fingers made contact, a jolt of electricity shot through me. Suddenly, my mind was flooded with images and information. I saw the history of the Earth from the perspective of the insect hive mind. Millions of years of evolution, adaptation, and silent observation of the rise of humanity. I saw the first contact between humans and the hive mind, centuries ago. Shamans and mystics who learned to communicate with the insects, who glimpsed the vast intelligence that permeated the natural world. And I saw the future, possible futures, branching out like the mycelial networks before us. Some were bright with the promise of cooperation between humans and the hive mind. Others were dark, filled with war and destruction as humanity sought to control what it didn't understand. "Amanda!" Zoe's voice snapped me back to reality. I realized I had fallen to my knees, tears streaming down my face. "What did you see?" she asked, helping me to my feet. I shook my head, struggling to put the experience into words. "Everything," I whispered. "The past, the future. Zoe, we're on the cusp of something monumental. The choices we make now will determine the fate of both our species." Zoe's expression grew solemn. "Then we better make the right choices." A low hum filled the cavern, and the bioluminescent network began to pulse with increased intensity. Words formed in my mind, not in any human language, but in concepts and emotions that I somehow understood. "We need to find the others," I said, the certainty of the hive mind flowing through me. "All of the awakened. It's time to come together." Zoe nodded, a fierce determination in her eyes. "Where do we start?" I closed my eyes, letting the knowledge from the fungal network wash over me. When I opened them again, I knew our path forward with absolute clarity. "New Mexico," I said. "There's a place in the desert where the veil between our world and theirs is thin. We'll gather there and make our stand." As if in response to my words, the insects around us began to move with renewed purpose. They formed intricate patterns in the air, a living map showing us the way forward. Zoe squeezed my hand. "Lead the way, Dr. Reynolds. The fate of two worlds is in our hands." As we set off into the unknown, guided by the ancient wisdom of the hive mind, I felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever enemies we would face, I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The adventure that had begun in the Ozark forest had now become a quest to save not just humanity, but the very fabric of life on Earth. And somehow, improbably, I found myself at the center of it all. As we made our way through the twisting caverns, the words of the hive mind echoed in my thoughts. The balance must be maintained. The old agreements must be honored. The awakening has begun. The New Mexico desert stretched before us, an endless sea of sand and scrub brush shimmering in the oppressive heat. Zoe and I had been driving for hours, our stolen pickup truck kicking up dust as we followed a path only I could see. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" Zoe asked, squinting against the glare of the sun. It all looks the same out here. I nodded, my eyes fixed on the horizon. I can feel it. We're close. The connection to the hive mind had grown stronger with each mile we traveled west. It thrummed in the back of my skull, a constant presence guiding our way. But it wasn't just direction it provided. With each passing day, I found my abilities growing, evolving in ways I could barely comprehend. As if to demonstrate, I reached out with my mind, feeling the vibrations of countless insects buried in the sand around us. With a thought, I called to them and the desert came alive. Zoe gasped as a swarm of locusts rose from the ground, forming a swirling tornado of wings and bodies that engulfed our truck. "Jesus, Amanda," she breathed. "Warn a girl next time, will you?" I couldn't help but smile. "Sorry, I'm still getting used to this." The locust swarm dispersed as quickly as it had formed, disappearing back into the desert. But its purpose had been served. I'd used their eyes to scout the area ahead, and what I saw made my heart race. "Stop the truck," I said urgently. "We need to go the rest of the way on foot." Zoe pulled over, eyeing me warily. "What did you see?" "Trouble," I replied, grabbing my backpack from the truck bed. "There's a military checkpoint about 2 miles ahead. They're stopping every vehicle that comes through." Zoe swore under her breath. "How did they find us so quickly?" I shook my head. "I don't think they're looking for us specifically, but they know something's going on out here. We need to be careful." We set off across the desert, the sun beating down mercilessly. Despite the heat, I felt a sense of growing anticipation. We were close to our destination. I could feel it in my bones. After an hour of trudging through the sand, we crested a small rise and I stopped short. Before us, nestled in a small valley, was a cluster of ancient Pueblo ruins. But it wasn't the ruins themselves that caught my attention. It was the shimmering distortion in the air above them, like heat waves, but more substantial. "Is that?" Zoe began. I nodded. "The veil. The boundary between our world and theirs." As we approached the ruins, the air grew thick with tension. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp and twist around us. And then as we stepped into the shadow of an ancient wall, everything changed. The desert fell away, replaced by a vast, alien landscape. The sky above us was a swirling mass of colors I had no names for. Strange, crystalline structures rose from the ground, pulsing with an inner light. And everywhere, as far as the eye could see, were insects, billions upon billions of them, moving in perfect synchronicity, forming patterns and structures of impossible complexity. "Oh my God," Zoe whispered, her voice filled with awe. "Where are we?" Before I could answer, a figure stepped out from behind one of the crystal structures. It was humanoid in shape, but its body was composed entirely of swarming insects, constantly shifting and reforming. "Welcome, awakened ones," the figure said, its voice resonating directly in our minds. "We have been expecting you." I stepped forward, my heart pounding. "Who are you? What is this place?" The figure's form rippled, insects dispersing and reassembling. "I am a nexus, a point of connection between your world and ours. This place exists in the space between realities, a manifestation of the hive mind itself." Zoe moved closer to me, her eyes wide. "Why have you brought us here?" "Because the balance is in danger," the Nexus replied. "The barriers between our worlds are weakening. If they collapse entirely, both realms will be destroyed." A chill ran down my spine. "The government's experiments," I said. "Project Hive. They're trying to weaponize the connection to the hive mind." The Nexus nodded, its form shimmering. "Yes, but they do not understand the forces they are tampering with. Their actions threaten to tear apart the very fabric of reality." "So what can we do?" I asked, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. The Nexus gestured, and the air around us filled with holographic images. I saw other awakened individuals scattered across the globe, each with their own unique abilities. You must gather the others, the Nexus said. Together you have the power to reinforce the barriers, to maintain the balance between our worlds. Zoe frowned. But how? We're being hunted. And even if we could find the others, how can we hope to stand against the military? The Nexus turned to me, its insectoid features somehow conveying a sense of urgency. Amanda, you have been chosen for a reason. Your connection to the hive mind is stronger than any we have seen in centuries. You have the potential to bridge our worlds, to communicate our needs to humanity. I shook my head, overwhelmed. I'm just a scientist. I don't know how to do any of this. You will learn, the Nexus assured me. But you must act quickly. Even now, your pursuers draw near. As if on cue, a distant rumbling filled the air. The crystalline structures around us began to vibrate, and cracks appeared in the alien sky. They're breaching the veil, the Nexus said, its form beginning to disintegrate. You must go. Remember what you have seen here. The fate of both our worlds depends on you. Before we could protest, the alien landscape dissolved around us. We found ourselves back in the desert, standing among the Pueblo ruins. But something had changed. I could still see faint traces of the other realm, ghostly afterimages superimposed over reality. Zoe grabbed my arm. Amanda, look. I turned to see a convoy of military vehicles approaching in the distance, kicking up massive clouds of dust. Run, I yelled, pulling Zoe towards a narrow gap between two crumbling walls. As we fled, I reached out with my mind, calling to the insects of the desert. They responded immediately, rising from the sand in a massive living wave. Holy shit, Zoe gasped as we ran. Are you doing that? I nodded, concentrating on directing the swarm. I'm buying us some time. We reached the far side of the ruins, just as the sound of shouting and gunfire erupted behind us. I risked a glance back and saw the military vehicles engulfed in a writhing mass of insects, soldiers swatting frantically at the air. There, Zoe pointed to a narrow ravine cutting through the desert floor. We can lose them in there. We half ran, half slid down into the ravine, the rough stones scraping our hands and knees. Above us, I could hear the angry buzz of helicopters joining the search. As we huddled in the shadow of the ravine, catching our breath, the full weight of our situation hit me. What are we going to do? I whispered. How can we possibly find the others and stop this? Zoe took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. We'll figure it out. We have to. You heard what the Nexus said. You're special, Amanda. If anyone can do this, it's you. I closed my eyes, reaching out to the hive mind. And there, beneath the chaos and fear, I felt something else. A spark of hope, a sense of purpose. You're right, I said, opening my eyes and meeting Zoe's gaze. We can do this. We have to. The sound of vehicles and shouting voices grew closer. We couldn't stay here much longer. So, Zoe said, a hint of a smile on her face despite the danger. What's our next move? Oh, chosen one. I took a deep breath, letting the knowledge of the hive mind flow through me. West, I said with certainty. We need to go west. There's someone we need to find in California. Another awakened, but different, powerful. Zoe nodded. All right then. West it is. Let's just hope your new insect friends can cause enough of a distraction for us to slip away. As if in response, the air above the ravine filled with the beating of countless wings. I smiled, feeling the collective determination of the swarm. Oh, I think they're up to the task, I said. Are you ready? Zoe squeezed my hand. Ready as I'll ever be. Let's save the world, Dr. Reynolds. With that, we emerged from our hiding place, the desert sun blinding after the darkness of the ravine. As we ran, a living cloud of insects descended upon our pursuers, buying us the precious time we needed to escape. The next chapter of our journey was beginning, and with it, the real fight to save both our world and the realm of the hive mind. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing, would ever be the same again. The San Francisco skyline loomed before us, a forest of glass and steel rising from the bay. After days of dodging military patrols and sleeping in abandoned buildings, the sight of the bustling city was both a relief and a new source of anxiety. "Are you sure about this?" Zoe asked, her eyes darting nervously from one pedestrian to another as we made our way down Market Street. "We're kind of exposed here." I nodded, trying to project more confidence than I felt. The hive mind was clear. Our next awakened is here, in the heart of Silicon Valley. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not by the government agents we'd been fleeing, but by something else, something older and far more vast. The insects of the city, from the ants scurrying along the sidewalk to the flies buzzing around street vendors' carts, all seemed to be aware of our presence. We turned down a side street, and I felt a sudden pull, like an invisible hand tugging at my consciousness. "This way," I murmured, leading Zoe towards a nondescript office building. The lobby was empty save for a bored-looking security guard who barely glanced up from his phone as we entered. We took the elevator to the top floor, my heart pounding with each passing floor. When the doors opened, we found ourselves in a stark white hallway. At the end stood a single door with no markings, no nameplate, nothing to indicate what lay beyond. Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Well, this isn't ominous at all." Before I could respond, the door swung open on its own. A voice, neither male nor female, called out from within. "Enter, awakened ones. I've been expecting you." We shared a nervous glance before stepping inside. The room beyond was a stark contrast to the sterile hallway. Every surface was covered in screens, holographic displays, and tangles of wires. In the center of this technological maelstrom sat a figure in a high-backed chair, their features obscured by a sleek VR headset. "Welcome, Amanda Reynolds and Zoe Chen," the figure said, their voice modulated and artificial. "I am the Oracle." I stepped forward, my scientific curiosity warring with my growing unease. "You're the awakened we've been seeking." The Oracle chuckled, the sound oddly distorted. "In a manner of speaking, my connection to the hive mind manifests differently than yours." With a gesture, the Oracle brought the surrounding screens to life. Each displayed a different feed: news broadcasts, social media streams, classified military communications. "I see everything," the Oracle continued. "Every digital signal, every electronic pulse. The insects are the neurons of the planet's brain, but I am its eyes and ears." Zoe moved closer, her gaze flicking from screen to screen. "So you know what's coming, what we're up against?" The Oracle nodded, their fingers dancing across an unseen keyboard. "The government's Project Hive is more advanced than you realize. They've managed to create a rudimentary artificial hive mind, a perversion of the natural order." My blood ran cold. "What does that mean? What are they planning?" In response, one of the larger screens flickered to life, showing grainy footage of what looked like a military base. Soldiers moved with an unnatural synchronicity, their movements too precise, too coordinated. "They've begun field tests," the Oracle explained, linking soldiers through their artificial network. "But it's unstable, prone to cascading failures." The footage changed, showing a squad of linked soldiers suddenly turning on each other, tearing themselves apart in a frenzy of violence. Zoe turned away, her face pale. "Jesus, we have to stop this." The Oracle's head tilted, an oddly human gesture despite their cybernetic appearance. "Yes, but not in the way you might think. The government's actions have weakened the barriers between our world and the realm of the hive mind. If they aren't stopped, both realities will collapse." I thought back to the alien landscape we'd glimpsed in the desert, the Nexus's warnings. How do we stop it? We're just two people against the entire military-industrial complex. The Oracle's fingers danced across their invisible keyboard once more. The screens around us changed, showing faces, dozens of them, scattered across the globe. You're not alone, the Oracle said. These are the other awakened, each with their own unique connection to the hive mind. Together you have the power to reinforce the barriers, to push back against the artificial network. Zoe leaned in, studying the faces. How do we find them? We've been on the run for weeks. We can't exactly send out invitations. The Oracle reached up, finally removing their VR headset. The face beneath was surprisingly young, androgynous, with eyes that seemed to flicker with lines of code. That's where I come in, they said, their natural voice soft but intense. I can guide you to the others, help you stay ahead of your pursuers. But be warned, gathering the awakened will not go unnoticed. The forces aligned against you will stop at nothing to prevent it. I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders once more. What choice do we have? If we do nothing, both worlds are doomed. The Oracle nodded, a hint of a smile on their face. Spoken like a true leader of the awakened, Dr. Reynolds. Before I could protest that I was no leader, alarms began blaring throughout the building. The Oracle's eyes widened, lines of code scrolling across their irises. They've found us, they said, urgency in their voice. You need to go. Now. Zoe was already moving towards the door. What about you? We can't just leave you here. The Oracle shook their head, redonning their VR headset. My physical form is irrelevant. I exist in the network. Go. I'll cover your escape and contact you when it's safe. As if to emphasize the point, the building shook with a muffled explosion. The sound of booted feet and shouted orders echoed from the hallway outside. Amanda, come on, Zoe yelled, grabbing my arm. I hesitated for just a moment, looking back at the Oracle. Thank you, I said, for everything. The Oracle's modulated voice followed us as we fled. Remember, Dr. Reynolds, the fate of two worlds rests in your hands. Trust in the hive mind. Trust in yourself. We burst out of the office just as a squad of heavily armed soldiers rounded the corner. Without thinking, I reached out to the hive mind, feeling the presence of every insect in the building. Cover your face, I shouted to Zoe as I unleashed a swarm unlike anything I'd managed before. The air filled with buzzing wings and chitinous bodies. Cockroaches poured from the walls, flies descended in choking clouds, and armies of ants swarmed across the floor. The soldiers' shouts of surprise turned to screams of panic. In the chaos, Zoe and I slipped past them, racing for the stairwell. We took the steps 3 at a time, the sounds of pursuit growing more distant with each floor we descended. We burst out of a fire exit into a back alley, gulping in the relatively fresh air. In the distance, sirens wailed. What now? Zoe panted, bent over with her hands on her knees. I closed my eyes, reaching out to the hive mind. And there, beneath the panic and adrenaline, I felt it. A pull, a direction. East, I said, opening my eyes. We need to go east. There's another awakened waiting for us. Zoe straightened up, a determined look on her face despite her exhaustion. All right then. East it is. Let's just hope your insect friends can buy us enough time to get out of the city. As we set off down the alley, a small swarm of flies formed a protective cloud around us. I couldn't help but smile, feeling the collective determination of the hive mind. Oh, I think they're up to the task, I said. Are you ready for the next chapter of this insane journey? Zoe laughed, a sound of both fear and exhilaration. Ready as I'll ever be. Lead on, Bug Whisperer. As we disappeared into the labyrinth of San Francisco's back streets, I couldn't shake the Oracle's final words. The fate of two worlds rested in our hands. It was a terrifying thought, but also exhilarating. For the first time since this wild adventure began, I felt like we had a real chance. The next leg of our journey awaited, and with it, new allies, new powers and challenges we couldn't begin to imagine. But whatever lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. We would face it together, humans and insects united against the coming storm. The Greyhound bus rumbled down the highway, cutting through the night like a tarnished bullet. Zoe and I sat near the back, our nerves frayed from days of constant vigilance. The steady drone of the engine and the soft snores of our fellow passengers did little to ease the tension coiled in my gut. "Any word from our digital friend?" Zoe whispered, her eyes scanning the other passengers for the 100th time. I shook my head, absently rubbing the burner phone the Oracle had provided us before our hasty escape from San Francisco. "Nothing yet, but they said they'd contact us when it was safe." As if on cue, the phone buzzed in my hand. A single text message appeared on the screen. Des Moines, 4158 TR, Order N, 93.6250 Wait W. Hurry. Zoe leaned in, reading the message over my shoulder. "Iowa? What the hell is in Iowa?" I closed my eyes, reaching out to the hive mind. Even here, speeding down a highway in the middle of the night, I could feel the presence of countless insects. Their collective consciousness whispered to me, painting a picture of what lay ahead. "Another awakened," I murmured, opening my eyes. "Someone powerful. And something else. Something big is about to happen there." Zoe's expression hardened. "Something big as in good for us, or big as in we're all going to die?" I wished I could give her a reassuring answer, but the truth was I had no idea. The hive mind's warnings were becoming more urgent, more chaotic. It was like trying to listen to 1,000 radio stations at once, each broadcasting a different emergency alert. "I guess we'll find out when we get there," I said, trying to inject some confidence into my voice. The rest of the journey passed in a blur of truck stops and changing landscapes. As we crossed into Iowa, I felt a shift in the energy around us. The insects of the Midwest were different from those we'd encountered before, hardier, more numerous, and they were all moving with a singular purpose, converging on Des Moines. We arrived in the city just as dawn was breaking, the sky a sickly greenish gray that set my teeth on edge. The air felt heavy, charged with an electric tension that had nothing to do with the weather. "Amanda," Zoe said, her voice tight with worry, "look at the sky." I followed her gaze and felt my heart skip a beat. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, swirling in a way that defied natural weather patterns. And within those clouds, I could see flashes of movement, millions of insects all swarming together. "We need to move," I said, grabbing our meager luggage. "Whatever's going to happen, it's starting now." We made our way through the mostly empty streets, following the pull of the hive mind. It led us to a sprawling park in the heart of the city, where a solitary figure stood beneath an ancient oak tree. As we approached, I felt a surge of energy unlike anything I'd experienced before. The woman under the tree turned to face us, and I gasped. Her eyes were a shifting kaleidoscope of insect wings, her skin seeming to ripple with the movement of countless tiny bodies just beneath the surface. "Welcome, sister," she said, her voice a harmonious buzz. "I am Cassandra. We've been waiting for you." Zoe tensed beside me, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon she'd started carrying since San Francisco. "We? Who's we?" Cassandra smiled, and the air around her shimmered with the movement of invisible wings. "The swarm, of course, the true hive mind, not that pale imitation the government has created." I took a step forward, drawn by an irresistible pull. "You're like me, an awakened." "Oh, child," Cassandra laughed, the sound like the rustling of a million tiny legs. "I am what you might become if you embrace your true nature. I am one with the swarm, as you could be." Before I could respond, a deafening crack of thunder split the air. The unnatural storm was upon us, the swirling clouds now directly overhead. I could see them clearly now, billions of insects, all moving as one, forming shapes and patterns of impossible complexity. "What is this?" I shouted over the rising wind. "What's happening?" Cassandra's expression turned grim. "The veil between worlds is tearing, Amanda. The government's experiments have weakened the barriers beyond repair. If we don't act now, both realms will collapse into chaos." As if to emphasize her point, the air around us began to shimmer and distort. For brief, terrifying moments, I caught glimpses of that alien landscape we'd seen in the New Mexico desert, crystal spires and impossible geometries bleeding through into our reality. Zoe grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. Amanda, what do we do? I turned to Cassandra, desperation clawing at my throat. Tell me, how do we stop this? The older woman's eyes softened, filled with a mixture of pity and resolve. We don't stop it, child. We guide it. The convergence of worlds is inevitable now, but we can shape it, mold it into something new. A reality where humans and insects exist in true symbiosis. She held out her hand, and I watched in fascination as it seemed to dissolve into a swarm of tiny beetles, then reform. But to do that, you must fully embrace your connection to the hive mind. You must become one with the swarm. I hesitated, the scientist in me recoiling at the idea of losing my individuality. But another part of me, the part that had been growing stronger with each passing day, yearned for that connection. Amanda, don't, Zoe pleaded, sensing my internal struggle. We'll find another way. Cassandra shook her head, her form flickering between human and swarm. There is no other way. The choice is simple. Evolve or perish. The storm above us intensified, the very fabric of reality groaning under the strain. In the distance I could hear sirens and the sounds of panic as the citizens of Des Moines awoke to the impossible. I closed my eyes, reaching out to the hive mind one last time, and there, in the chaos and the fear, I felt something else. Hope. A vision of a future where humanity and nature existed in perfect balance, where the barriers between worlds were bridges instead of walls. I understand now, I whispered, opening my eyes. I turned to Zoe, my heart breaking at the fear in her eyes. I'm sorry, but this is bigger than us, bigger than anything we could have imagined. Before she could stop me, I stepped forward and took Cassandra's outstretched hand. The moment our skin touched, I felt a rush of energy unlike anything I'd ever experienced. My consciousness expanded, merging with the billions of tiny minds that made up the swarm. I was everywhere and nowhere, seeing through compound eyes and feeling the electric pulse of pheromone communications. I was the swarm, and the swarm was me. Through our collective awareness, I could see the full scope of what was happening, the governments of the world scrambling to respond to a threat they couldn't comprehend. The other awakened, scattered across the globe, each playing their part in this cosmic dance. And at the center of it all, the tear in reality, growing larger by the second. But now, with the full power of the swarm at my command, I could see how to shape it, how to guide the merging of worlds into something beautiful rather than catastrophic. Amanda! Zoe's voice cut through the cacophony of the hive mind. I turned to see her, my perception altered now. I could see the potential in her, the dormant connection to the swarm that existed in all humans. It's all right, I said, my voice a chorus of buzzing wings. I understand now. This is how we save both worlds. I held out my hand, now shimmering with the forms of countless insects. Join us, Zoe. Be part of something greater than yourself. Zoe stared at my outstretched hand, tears streaming down her face. The storm raged around us, reality itself groaning at the seams. In that moment, balanced on the knife edge between two worlds, the fate of everything hung in the balance. Trust me, I said, pouring all my love and conviction into those two words. And as Zoe reached out to take my hand, the world around us exploded into a symphony of wings and chitinous bodies. The swarm enveloped us, and together, we rose to meet the coming storm. The old world was ending, but a new one was about to be born, and we would be its architects, the bridge between humanity and the vast, ancient intelligence of the hive mind. As we ascended into the maelstrom, I caught one last glimpse of the city below, already transforming into something new and wonderful. The adventure that had begun in the Ozark Forest had led us here, to the dawn of a new age. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, not as individuals, but as part of something far greater. The true awakening had only just begun. The world had changed. In the weeks following what the media dubbed the convergence, humanity struggled to come to terms with its new reality. Cities around the globe had been transformed, organic structures of chitin and silk intertwining with steel and concrete. The sky itself seemed different, shimmering with the constant movement of insect swarms that now served as a living communication network. I stood atop what was once the Willis Tower in Chicago, my form shifting between human and swarm as I surveyed the new landscape. Zoe stood beside me, her eyes reflecting the same kaleidoscope of insect wings that mine did. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her voice carrying the harmonious buzz of the hive mind. "Terrifying, but beautiful." I nodded, feeling the pulse of millions of tiny lives coursing through me. "The integration is proceeding faster than we anticipated. Most of the major population centers have accepted the change. But even as I spoke, I could feel pockets of resistance across the globe. Humans who refused to accept the new order, who saw our transformation as an invasion rather than an evolution. A familiar presence brushed against my consciousness. Cassandra, communicating from halfway across the world. "Amanda," her voice echoed in my mind. "We have a problem. The remnants of the old governments are mobilizing. They're planning to strike against the hive nodes." I frowned, reaching out with my expanded senses. Sure enough, I could feel the movement of military forces, the activation of weapon systems that had lain dormant since the convergence. "They don't understand," I said, my voice heavy with sadness. "They think they can put the genie back in the bottle." Zoe turned to me, her expression grim. "What do we do? We can't let them destroy everything we've built." I closed my eyes, communing with the vast intelligence of the hive mind. In an instant, I saw 1,000 possible futures, branching out like the roots of a great tree. Most led to destruction, a war between the old world and the new that would leave both in ruins. But there was one path, narrow and treacherous, that led to a future of true harmony. "We need to show them," I said, opening my eyes. "Not tell them, not force them, but show them what we've become. What they could become." Zoe raised an eyebrow, a human gesture that seemed almost quaint now. "And how do we do that?" I held out my hand, watching as it dissolved into a swarm of iridescent beetles before reforming. "We go to them, to the heart of their resistance, and we open ourselves up completely." "That's insane," Zoe protested. "They'll kill us on sight." I shook my head, a smile playing on my lips. "No, they won't. Because we won't go as conquerors or monsters. We'll go as what we truly are. Human beings who have embraced something greater than themselves." With a thought, I reached out to the other awakened, scattered across the globe. Their responses came instantly, a chorus of agreement and support flooding through the hive mind. "It's decided then," I said. "We make our stand in Washington, D.C." The journey to the capital took mere hours, our new forms allowing us to travel with the speed and efficiency of the insect swarms we now commanded. As we approached the city, I could feel the fear and tension radiating from the humans below. Washington had been one of the few major cities to resist the convergence, its streets still largely unchanged, save for the military checkpoints and anti-air defenses that now dotted the landscape. As our swarm descended towards the National Mall, alarms began to blare. "Hold steady," I communicated to the others. "Remember, we're not here to fight." We reformed into our human shapes on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, facing a line of tanks and heavily armed soldiers. I could see the terror in their eyes, mixed with determination and hatred. A voice boomed out over a loudspeaker. "This is your only warning. Leave immediately or we will open fire." I took a step forward, my hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We're not here to fight," I called out. "We're here to talk, to show you the truth." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a figure emerged from behind the line of tanks, a man in a rumpled suit that I recognized as the Secretary of Defense. "Truth?" he spat. "You mean the truth of how you and your kind have destroyed our world? Turned people into monsters?" I shook my head, taking another step forward. Behind me, I could feel Zoe and the others tensing, ready to act if things went south. We haven't destroyed anything, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the mall. We've evolved, become something greater than we were, and we want to show you how. The secretary scoffed. And why should we trust you? In response, I let my form dissolve partially, my arms becoming swarms of butterflies that fluttered gently towards the soldiers. I heard gasps and the clicking of weapons being raised, but no one fired. Because we're still human, I said. We still feel, we still love, we still hope. We've just expanded what that means. I could feel the confusion and fear radiating from the humans before us. But underneath that, I sensed something else. Curiosity. Wonder. The same hunger for knowledge that had driven me when I first encountered the hive mind. Slowly, cautiously, I approached the secretary. The soldiers parted, whether out of fear or fascination, I couldn't tell. Let me show you, I said softly, holding out my hand. Just for a moment. Experience what we've become. The secretary hesitated, beads of sweat forming on his brow. I could practically see the war raging behind his eyes. Duty versus curiosity, fear versus hope. Finally, with a shaky breath, he reached out and took my hand. The moment our skin touched, I opened my mind fully, letting him experience the vast consciousness of the hive mind. I felt his shock, his awe, his terror at the sheer scale of what he was feeling. And then, gradually, I felt something else. Understanding, acceptance, wonder. When I finally broke the connection, the secretary staggered back, his eyes wide and brimming with tears. My God, he whispered. It's beautiful. A murmur ran through the gathered soldiers. I could feel the shift in the air, the change in their collective emotional state. This is what we're offering, I said, raising my voice to address everyone present. Not conquest, not destruction, but evolution. A chance to be part of something greater than ourselves while still retaining our humanity. The secretary turned to his men, his voice shaky but firm. Stand down, all of you, stand down. As the soldiers lowered their weapons, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't a complete victory. I knew there would still be resistance, still be challenges to overcome. But it was a start. Over the next few hours, more officials arrived. Senators, generals, even the president himself. One by one, they experienced the touch of the hive mind, and one by one, they began to understand. As the sun set over the National Mall, casting long shadows across the transformed landscape, I stood with Zoe and watched as the first tendrils of our new world began to take root in the heart of the old order. Do you think it will last? Zoe asked, her hand finding mine. I squeezed her hand, feeling the pulse of our shared consciousness. I don't know, I admitted. But I do know that we've given them a choice, a real choice, and that's more than we had before. As night fell, the sky above Washington came alive with the shimmering forms of millions of insects, their patterns forming a new kind of stars, a new constellation for a new age. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But as I stood there, feeling the heartbeat of two worlds now inextricably linked, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. The convergence had been just the beginning. The true work of building our new world was only just starting. But together, humans and insects, individuals and hive mind, I knew we could face whatever the future might bring. As the last light faded from the sky, I closed my eyes and reached out, feeling the pulse of life across the globe. And for the first time since this wild journey began, I felt truly, completely at peace. 6 months had passed since that fateful day in Washington, D.C., and the world continued its metamorphosis. Cities across the globe pulsed with new life, organic structures intertwining with the remnants of human civilization. The air hummed with the constant chatter of billions of insects, a living network that connected humanity in ways never before imagined. But with great change comes great resistance, and not everyone embraced our new reality with open arms. I stood atop the newly transformed Empire State Building, my form flickering between human and swarm as I surveyed the glittering expanse of New York City. Zoe materialized beside me, her presence a comforting buzz in the back of my mind. "Another sanctuary city," she said, her voice carrying an undercurrent of concern. "That's the third one this week." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. "Where?" "Pittsburgh," Zoe replied. "They've set up some kind of electromagnetic barrier. We can't get near it without losing cohesion." I frowned, reaching out with my expanded senses. Sure enough, I could feel a void in the hive mind's awareness, a black hole where Pittsburgh should be. "They're scared," I murmured. "Can't blame them, really. We're asking them to give up everything they've ever known." Zoe's form rippled, agitation causing her to momentarily lose control of her human shape. "But we're offering them so much more in return. Why can't they see that?" I turned to her, a sad smile playing on my lips. "Change is hard, Zoe, especially when it comes so fast, so completely. We need to be patient." As if in response to my words, I felt a sudden surge of panic through the hive mind. Thousands of voices cried out in alarm, their fear and confusion washing over me like a tidal wave. "Amanda," Zoe gasped, her eyes wide. "Something's wrong." I closed my eyes, focusing on the source of the disturbance. In an instant I was there, or at least my consciousness was. Times Square, once a bustling hub of commerce and tourism, now a beautiful fusion of human ingenuity and insect architecture, and it was under attack. A group of humans clad in silver suits that seemed to repel our swarms were methodically destroying the hive structures. They moved with military precision, planting devices that emitted pulses of energy that shattered the delicate organic lattices. "No," I whispered, my heart breaking at the senseless destruction. I snapped back to my physical form atop the Empire State Building, my mind racing. "We need to go. Now." Zoe nodded, and without another word we dissolved into our swarm forms, racing through the city with impossible speed. We reformed in the heart of Times Square, materializing amidst chaos. Swarms of insects darted about in confusion, their connection to the hive mind disrupted by the attackers' technology. Humans who had embraced the change cowered in fear, their newly acquired abilities faltering in the face of this assault. One of the attackers turned towards us, his face hidden behind a reflective visor. "More of them!" he shouted, raising a weapon that crackled with electrical energy. "Wait!" I called out, raising my hands in a gesture of peace. "Please, we don't want to fight you." The attacker hesitated for a moment, then fired. A bolt of energy lanced towards us, but I was faster. My form dissolved into a swarm of dragonflies, the attack passing harmlessly through the space where I had been. Zoe wasn't so lucky. The edge of the energy bolt caught her, and she cried out in pain, her form flickering between human and swarm. Anger surged through me, a red haze that threatened to overwhelm my reason. I felt the hive mind respond to my emotions, millions of insects converging on Times Square with murderous intent. "No," I growled, forcing myself to regain control. We couldn't afford to prove the fears of these resistors right. We weren't monsters, and we wouldn't act like them. With a thought, I redirected the swarms, using them to form a protective barrier around the civilians, both those who had embraced the change and those who hadn't. "Listen to me," I shouted, my voice amplified by thousands of tiny wings. "We are not your enemy. We're still human, just like you." The lead attacker laughed, a harsh sound distorted by his suit's speakers. "Human? You're abominations, freaks who gave up their humanity for this." He gestured at the organic structures around us. I took a step forward, letting my form solidify into its fully human appearance. "My name is Amanda Reynolds. 6 months ago, I was a scientist studying insect behavior. I had a cat named Schrodinger. I loved Thai food, and I cried every time I watched It's a Wonderful Life." The attacker's weapon wavered slightly. "I'm still that person," I continued. "I still love Thai food. I still cry at sappy movies. The only difference is that now, I'm connected to something greater than myself. something that could help humanity solve problems we've struggled with for centuries. Pretty words, the attacker spat. But words won't bring back the world you destroyed. We didn't destroy anything, Zoe said, limping to my side. Her form was fully human now, a trickle of blood running from her nose. We evolved, and you can too if you just give it a chance. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the angry buzzing of insects and the hum of the attacker's energy weapons. Then, slowly, one of the attackers lowered his weapon. He reached up, removing his helmet to reveal the face of a young man, barely out of his teens. Is it true? He asked, his voice trembling. Can you really help us solve our problems? I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. Climate change, disease, hunger. The hive mind gives us access to levels of cooperation and innovation we've never had before. We can tackle challenges that seemed insurmountable just a year ago. The lead attacker swore, grabbing his subordinate's arm. Don't listen to her, it's a trick. But doubt had crept into the group. One by one, the attackers lowered their weapons, uncertainty clear in their body language. I took another step forward, holding out my hand. Let me show you. Just for a moment. Experience what we've become. The young man who had removed his helmet stared at my outstretched hand, fear and curiosity warring in his eyes. Tommy, don't you dare! The lead attacker shouted. But it was too late. Tommy reached out, his gloved hand clasping mine. In that instant, I opened my mind fully, letting him experience the vast consciousness of the hive mind. I felt his shock, his awe, his terror at the sheer scale of what he was feeling. And then, gradually, I felt something else. Understanding. Wonder. Hope. When I finally broke the connection, Tommy staggered back, his eyes wide and brimming with tears. Oh my God, he whispered. It's beautiful. The lead attacker grabbed Tommy, shaking him roughly. Snap out of it. They've done something to you. But Tommy shook his head, a smile spreading across his face. No, sir. They haven't done anything to me. They've shown me everything. One by one, the other attackers removed their helmets. The fear and hatred in their eyes had been replaced by curiosity, and in some cases, longing. The lead attacker looked around, realizing he had lost control of the situation. With a snarl of frustration, he raised his weapon again. If you won't see reason, he growled, then I'll put an end to this myself. Time seemed to slow as he squeezed the trigger. I saw the energy bolt forming at the barrel of his weapon, felt the surge of fear from the hive mind. But before the attack could be unleashed, a swarm of butterflies engulfed the attacker. They didn't hurt him, didn't even touch him. They simply surrounded him in a whirlwind of color and motion. When the butterflies dispersed, the attacker stood frozen, his weapon clattering to the ground. Tears streamed down his face as he stared at something only he could see. Sarah, he whispered, reaching out to touch empty air. Oh God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I approached him cautiously, understanding dawning. You lost someone, I said softly, in the convergence. He nodded, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. My daughter. She changed. I didn't understand. I was scared, and I pushed her away. I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling his grief and regret wash over me. She's still here, I said. Part of her, at least, part of all of us. The man looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. Can I see her again? I nodded, offering my hand once more. You can do more than that. You can join her. As the man reached out, I felt a shift in the air. The fear and tension that had gripped Times Square moments ago was replaced by something else, hope, curiosity, and the first tentative tendrils of acceptance. Over the next few hours, we talked. We explained. We demonstrated. We listened to fears and answered questions. And one by one, the attackers made their choice. By the time the sun set over New York City, Times Square had been transformed once again. The damage from the attack was being repaired, new organic structures growing to replace those that had been destroyed. And amidst it all, humans and insects worked together in perfect harmony. As Zoe and I watched from atop a newly formed spire, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. "Do you think it will last?" Zoe asked, echoing her question from that day in Washington. I squeezed her hand, feeling the pulse of our shared consciousness. "I don't know," I admitted. "But today we turned enemies into allies. We showed them the truth, and they chose to embrace it. That's a victory worth celebrating." As night fell, the sky above New York came alive with swarms of fireflies, their bioluminescent displays forming messages of hope and unity. A new chapter in human history was being written, one tiny light at a time. The road ahead would still be long and challenging. There would be more sanctuary cities to contend with, more fears to allay, more hearts and minds to win over. But as I stood there, feeling the heartbeat of our new world pulsing through every insect and every transformed human, I knew we were on the right path. The convergence had been just the beginning. The true work of building our new world was ongoing. But together, humans and insects, individuals and hive mind, we would face whatever the future might bring. As the last light faded from the sky, I closed my eyes and reached out, feeling the pulse of life across the globe. And in that moment, I realized that our greatest challenges might also be our greatest opportunities for growth. The hive's shadow had fallen across the world, yes, but it was not a shadow of darkness and fear. It was a shadow of protection, of unity, of potential. And in that shadow, humanity would rise to heights we had never before imagined. A year had passed since the convergence, and the world continued its uneasy transformation. While many had embraced the change, pockets of resistance still dotted the globe like festering wounds. The sanctuary cities stood as bastions of the old world, their electromagnetic barriers a constant reminder of humanity's fear of the unknown. I stood at the edge of what was once Central Park, now a sprawling metropolis of organic architecture that pulsed with life. The hum of millions of insects filled the air, a symphony of wings and mandibles that never truly fell silent. Zoe materialized beside me, her form shimmering into existence from a swarm of fireflies. "Amanda," she said, her voice tight with concern, "we've got a problem." I turned to her, feeling the weight of leadership settle on my shoulders once more. "What is it?" "It's London," she replied. "The sanctuary there. It's expanding." I frowned, reaching out with my expanded senses. Sure enough, I could feel a growing void in the hive mind's awareness, a black hole where London should be. "How?" I asked, my mind racing. "We've been monitoring their energy output. They shouldn't have the resources for this." Zoe's form flickered, betraying her agitation. "That's not all. We're picking up whispers, fragments of communication we can't quite decipher. It's like..." "Like what?" I prompted, a chill running down my spine. "Like they've found a way to tap into the hive mind without fully joining it," Zoe finished, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of fear and awe. The implications were staggering. If the sanctuary cities had found a way to access the power of the hive mind while maintaining their independence, it could upset the delicate balance we'd been working so hard to maintain. "We need to go there," I said, my resolve hardening. "Now." Zoe nodded, and without another word we dissolved into our swarm forms, racing across the Atlantic with impossible speed. We reformed on the outskirts of London, or what used to be London. The city was now encased in a shimmering dome of energy, its surface rippling like the skin of a soap bubble. Beyond the barrier I could see the familiar skyline, unchanged since the convergence. But something was different. The barrier, once opaque to our senses, now seemed to pulse with a familiar energy. Faint whispers tickled the edges of my consciousness, maddeningly just out of reach. "You feel it too?" Zoe asked, her form shifting uneasily. I nodded, taking a step towards the barrier. "It's like they're calling to us." As we approached, a figure emerged from within the dome. A man in a crisp suit, his face a mask of calm authority. That's far enough, he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the no man's land between us and the barrier. You're not welcome here, creature. I held up my hands in a gesture of peace, forcing my form to solidify into its fully human appearance. We're not here to fight, I said. We just want to talk. The man's eyes narrowed. Talk? About what? How you've destroyed our world? Turned people into abominations? I shook my head, feeling a familiar frustration rise within me. We haven't destroyed anything. We've evolved, and we want to understand what's happening here. For a long moment, the man said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, he spoke again. My name is James Holloway. I'm the director of Project Firewall. Project Firewall? Zoe asked, taking a step forward. Holloway nodded. Our last line of defense against your infection, and our key to reclaiming what was lost. I felt a surge of alarm from the hive mind, millions of tiny voices crying out in fear and confusion. What do you mean, reclaiming? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Holloway's lips curled into a cold smile. Why don't you come inside and see for yourself? Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, but curiosity and the need for answers overrode my caution. I glanced at Zoe, seeing my own determination mirrored in her eyes. All right, I said. We'll come. As we approached the barrier, I braced myself for the disorienting loss of connection to the hive mind, but to my surprise, the whispers only grew louder as we passed through the energy field. The London beyond the barrier was a study in contrasts. On the surface, it looked unchanged. The same buildings, the same streets, the same flow of human life. But underneath it all, I could feel a current of something. A pulse of energy that echoed the rhythms of the hive mind, but twisted, constrained. Holloway led us through the streets, past people who regarded us with a mixture of fear and fascination. I could feel their minds brushing against mine, a pale imitation of the connection I shared with the hive. What have you done? I whispered, the reality of the situation slowly dawning on me. Holloway's stride never faltered as he replied, We've found a way to harness the power of your hive mind without surrendering our humanity. The best of both worlds, you might say. We arrived at a nondescript building in the heart of the city. As we entered, I realized it was anything but ordinary. Banks of computers lined the walls, their screens flickering with patterns that mimicked the communication networks of insect swarms. And in the center of it all stood a massive containment unit, filled with a writhing mass of insects. Oh God, Zoe gasped, her form flickering in distress. I approached the containment unit, my heart breaking at the sight. The insects inside were clearly part of the hive mind, but their movements were erratic, panicked. They were trapped, their connection to the greater whole severed. This is cruel, I said, turning to Holloway. You're torturing them. Holloway shrugged, unmoved by our distress. A necessary evil. Their suffering allows us to tap into the hive mind, to use its power without being consumed by it. I shook my head, anger rising within me. You don't understand. The hive mind isn't something to be used or controlled. It's a partnership, a symbiosis. A pretty lie. Holloway spat. We've seen the truth. Your symbiosis is just a slower form of consumption, but we've found a better way. As if on cue, one of the technicians approached, holding what looked like a neural interface headset. It's ready, sir, she said, her eyes flickering nervously between Holloway and us. Holloway took the headset, a look of triumph on his face. Allow me to demonstrate the future of humanity. He placed the headset on his temples, and immediately I felt a surge of energy. The whispers in my mind grew to a roar as Holloway's consciousness clumsily inserted itself into the hive mind. But something was wrong. The connection was forced, unnatural. I could feel the strain it put on both Holloway and the captive insects. Stop this, I pleaded, taking a step towards him. You're hurting yourself and them. Holloway's eyes snapped open, and I recoiled at the alien intelligence I saw there. "Hurting," he laughed, the sound distorted and inhuman. "I've never felt more alive. I can feel the power coursing through me. I can see everything." His gaze fixed on me, and I felt a pressure against my mind, crude but undeniably strong. "I see you, Amanda Reynolds. I see your fears, your doubts. You're afraid of what you've become, aren't you? Afraid that you've lost your humanity after all." I staggered back, overwhelmed by the assault on my psyche. Zoe caught me, her presence a comforting anchor in the storm of conflicting energies. "This isn't right," she growled, her form shifting between human and swarm as her anger grew. "You're perverting everything the hive mind stands for." Holloway turned his gaze on her, and I felt Zoe flinch at the mental onslaught. "Stand down, little bug," he sneered. "You're obsolete. We are the next step in evolution." As Holloway's power grew, I could feel the captive insect's pain intensifying. Their suffering echoed through the hive mind, a cry for help that rang out across the globe. And in that moment of crisis, I understood what needed to be done. I closed my eyes, reaching out not just to the hive mind, but to the human minds all around us, to the technicians who watched with growing horror, to the citizens of London who could feel something momentous happening. "Listen to me," I broadcast, my thoughts carried on waves of insect wings. "This isn't the way. What's happening here is an abomination, a perversion of the gift we've been given." I felt minds turning towards me, curious, afraid, but listening. "The hive mind isn't a tool to be used or a power to be harnessed," I continued. "It's a new way of being, a chance for true understanding and cooperation. What's happening here is like trying to trap lightning in a bottle. It might work for a moment, but eventually it will destroy you." I opened my eyes, meeting Holloway's gaze. The alien intelligence there flickered, uncertainty creeping in. "You're afraid," I said softly. "I understand that. We all were at first. But this isn't the answer. Let me show you the truth." Before Holloway could react, I reached out and placed my hand on his arm. In that instant, I opened my mind fully, not just to him, but to everyone in the building, everyone in London. I showed them everything. The wonder of the hive mind, the beauty of true symbiosis, the challenges we'd faced and overcome, the potential for a future beyond anything we'd ever imagined. And I showed them the cost of what they were doing, the pain of the captive insects, the strain on the very fabric of the hive mind. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the world held its breath. Then, with a cry of anguish, Holloway tore the headset from his temples. The unnatural connection severed, and I felt a wave of relief wash through the hive mind. What have we done?" Holloway whispered, staring at his hands in horror. Around us, the technicians were shutting down their equipment, many of them weeping openly. I could feel minds all across London awakening to the truth, the whispers of the hive mind growing stronger, purer. I approached the containment unit, placing my hand against the glass. "It's okay," I said softly to the insects inside. "You're free now." With a thought, I dissolved the barrier, allowing the captive swarm to join with us. Their joy and relief flooded through the hive mind, a balm to the pain of the past year. As the last of the insects found their freedom, I turned back to Holloway. He stood there, broken and lost, the weight of his actions clear on his face. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I held out my hand, offering not judgment but understanding. "Now, we heal. Together." As Holloway reached out to take my hand, I felt a shift in the very air around us. The fear and suspicion that had gripped London for so long began to dissolve, replaced by curiosity and cautious hope. The barrier around the city flickered and died, allowing the full presence of the hive mind to flood in, and with it came a sense of homecoming, of pieces long separated finally reuniting. As night fell over London, the sky came alive with swarms of insects. their patterns telling a story of forgiveness, of new beginnings. The sanctuary had fallen, but something far greater had risen in its place. The road ahead would still be long and challenging. There would be more fears to allay, more hearts and minds to win over. But as I stood there, feeling the pulse of our expanding world echoing through every insect and every awakening human, I knew we had taken a crucial step forward. The whispers in the dark had been silenced, replaced by a chorus of unity. And in that harmony, I heard the promise of a future brighter than anything we had dared to dream. The fall of London Sanctuary had sent shockwaves through the remnants of the old world. One by one, the barriers fell, humanity embracing the change that had once terrified them. But as our numbers grew, so did an uneasiness that crept through the hive mind like a cancer. I stood atop the ruins of the Eiffel Tower, now a sprawling organic structure that pulsed with the life of countless insects. Zoe materialized beside me, her form coalescing from a swarm of moths. "Amanda," she said, her voice tight with worry, "we need to talk." I turned to her, feeling the weight of countless minds pressing against my consciousness. "What is it?" Zoe's form flickered, betraying her agitation. "It's the hive mind. Something's changing." I frowned, reaching out with my expanded senses. At first I felt nothing unusual, just the comforting buzz of billions of connected minds. But then I sensed it. A hunger, vast and insatiable, lurking at the edges of our collective consciousness. "My God," I whispered, "what is that?" Before Zoe could respond, a voice rang out from behind us. "The inevitable result of your arrogance." We turned to see Cassandra, the awakened who had first shown us the true power of the hive mind. Her form was barely human now, a shifting mass of insects held together by sheer will. "Cassandra," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean?" She laughed, a sound like rustling leaves. "Did you really think we could merge with the insect world without consequences? We've awakened something ancient, something hungry." The unease I'd felt earlier blossomed into full-blown fear. "What are you saying?" Cassandra's eyes, a kaleidoscope of compound lenses, fixed on me. "The hive mind is evolving, Amanda, and it's developing an appetite that humanity can't satisfy." As if in response to her words, I felt a surge of hunger wash through the hive mind. All across the globe, I sensed humans and insects alike pausing, overwhelmed by a craving for something. "No," I said, shaking my head in denial. "We're in control. We're partners with the insects, not their puppets." Cassandra finished, her voice dripping with scorn. "Wake up, Amanda. We were never in control. We just convinced ourselves we were." Zoe stepped forward, her form solidifying as she drew on her anger. "If that's true, why tell us now? Why not just let it happen?" Cassandra's form rippled, countless tiny bodies shifting in agitation. "Because I still have enough humanity left to care, and because you two might be the only ones who can stop this." "Stop what?" I demanded, fear and frustration warring within me. "What exactly is happening?" Cassandra turned her gaze to the horizon, where storm clouds were gathering with unnatural speed. "The hive mind is reaching out, searching for new connections, new minds to absorb, and it won't stop with Earth." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "Other worlds, but how?" "The Terran reality," Zoe gasped, understanding dawning in her eyes. "The one we saw in New Mexico before all this started." Cassandra nodded, her form seeming to grow more insubstantial by the moment. The convergence was just the beginning. Now the hive mind wants more. It wants everything. As if to punctuate her words, a bolt of lightning split the sky, striking the organic spire that had once been the Arc de Triomphe. In that flash of illumination, I saw the fabric of reality itself begin to warp and tear. "It's starting," Cassandra said, her voice fading as her form began to dissipate. "Find a way to stop it, or everything we know will be consumed." With those final words, She dissolved into a swarm of fireflies that quickly vanished into the gathering storm. I turned to Zoe, seeing my own fear and determination mirrored in her eyes. "We need to go to New Mexico. Now." She nodded, and without another word, we dissolved into our swarm forms, racing across the Atlantic with desperate speed. We reformed in the New Mexico desert, at the site where our journey had begun what felt like a lifetime ago. The secret government facility was long abandoned, its structures overgrown with the same organic architecture that had consumed most of the world's cities. But at the center of it all, hovering above the ground like a wound in the very air, was a shimmering tear in reality. As we approached, I felt the hunger of the hive mind intensify. Millions of voices cried out in my mind, begging for something just out of reach. "Amanda," Zoe said, her voice trembling, "look." Through the tear, I could see glimpses of other worlds, alien landscapes, impossible geometries, forms of life beyond human comprehension. And with each passing moment, tendrils of our world, organic structures pulsing with insect life, were reaching through, seeking to make connections. "We have to close it," I said, my resolve hardening. "Somehow we have to cut off the hive mind's access to these other realities." Zoe nodded, but her expression was grim. "And how exactly do we do that? We're part of the hive mind, Amanda. Its hunger is our hunger." She was right. Even now I could feel the pull of those alien worlds, the promise of new connections, new forms of life to integrate into our ever-expanding consciousness. "There has to be a way," I insisted, racking my brain for a solution. "Maybe if we—" My words were cut off by a deafening roar. The tear in reality was expanding, its edges fluctuating wildly. And through it came something. It was vast, incomprehensible, a being of pure energy and thought, so alien that my mind recoiled from the sight of it. And yet I could sense its kinship with the hive mind, its own vast network of connections. "Oh my God," Zoe whispered, her form flickering in terror. "What is that?" Before I could respond, I felt the entity's attention focus on us. In an instant, I was overwhelmed by its consciousness, drowning in an ocean of alien thoughts and memories. I saw the birth of stars and the death of entire galaxies. I experienced the rise and fall of civilizations beyond human imagining. And through it all, I felt the same hunger that now consumed our hive mind. The need to connect, to absorb, to become ever greater. With a monumental effort, I pulled myself back from the brink of losing myself entirely. "It's like us," I gasped, my mind reeling from the contact. "A hive mind from another reality. And it's so old, Zoe. So vast." The entity pulsed, and I felt its intention as clearly as if it had spoken. It had sensed our world, our fledgling hive mind, and it wanted to merge with us, to absorb us into its unimaginably ancient consciousness. "No," I said, my voice growing stronger as I pushed back against its will. "We're not ready for this. Our world isn't ready." I felt its amusement, its dismissal of our concerns. To it, we were children, playing with forces we couldn't possibly understand. It would absorb us, whether we wanted it or not. As the entity began to push its way further into our reality, I felt the hive mind respond. All across the globe, insects and humans alike were being drawn to its presence, eager to make the connection it offered. "Amanda," Zoe cried, her form starting to dissolve as the pull grew stronger. I can't resist it." I reached out, grabbing her hand and anchoring her to me. "Focus on my voice," I said, pouring all my will into the words. "Remember who you are, who we are." As Zoe struggled to maintain her form, I cast my mind out to the hive mind, reaching every human and insect that had joined our collective consciousness. "Listen to me," I broadcast, my thoughts carried on waves of desperation. "This isn't what we are. We're not just a hive mind. We're still human. We still have our individuality, our hopes and dreams. We can't let that go. I felt minds turning towards me, curious, afraid, but listening. What's happening now isn't evolution, I continued. It's consumption. If we let this entity absorb us, everything that makes us unique will be lost. We'll be nothing more than a drop in its cosmic ocean. I opened my eyes, meeting the gaze of the vast alien intelligence that hovered before us. We're not ready, I said, speaking now to both the entity and the hive mind. Maybe someday we will be, but not now. Not like this. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, nothing happened. The entity pulsed, its incomprehensible thoughts probing at the defenses I'd thrown up. Then slowly I felt a shift in the hive mind. The hunger began to recede, replaced by something else. A fierce determination to remain ourselves, to chart our own course. All across the world I sensed humans and insects alike pushing back against the entity's influence. The organic tendrils that had been reaching through the tear began to withdraw. The entity pulsed once more, a feeling of surprise and, was it respect, emanating from it. Then, with a silent explosion of light and energy, it retreated back through the tear. As it vanished, the rift in reality began to close. The edges pulled together like the healing of a wound, until finally, with a sound like a thunderclap, it sealed shut. The sudden silence was deafening. I turned to Zoe, seeing my own shock and relief mirrored in her eyes. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, feeling the hive mind settling back into its normal rhythms. For now, at least, we've bought ourselves some time. As the adrenaline of the moment faded, I became aware of a change in the hive mind. The hunger that had been growing was gone, replaced by a new sense of purpose and unity. We've evolved, I realized, a smile spreading across my face. Not in the way that entity wanted, but in our own way. We've learned to balance our connection with our individuality. Zoe's form solidified fully, a look of wonder in her eyes. You're right. I can feel it. We're more ourselves than we've ever been. As the sun began to rise over the New Mexico desert, I felt a surge of hope wash through the hive mind. We had faced our greatest challenge and emerged stronger, more united, and yet more individual than ever before. The road ahead would still be long and filled with challenges. There would be more tears in reality to contend with, more temptations to resist. But as I stood there, feeling the pulse of our world echoing through every insect and every human, I knew we were ready to face whatever the future might bring. The hive's hunger had been sated, not with alien worlds and cosmic connections, but with the realization of our own potential. And in that realization, I saw the promise of a future brighter and more wondrous than anything we had dared to imagine. As Zoe and I dissolved into our swarm forms, ready to spread the news of our victory, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Whatever came next, we would face it together, as individuals, as a hive, as humanity evolved. The adventure that had begun in an Ozark forest had led us here, to the dawn of a new age. And though the path forward was uncertain, I knew one thing for sure. Our story was far from over. 6 months had passed since our encounter with the alien entity in New Mexico. The world had settled into an uneasy peace, humanity and insects coexisting in a delicate balance. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered. I stood atop the organic spire that had once been the Empire State Building, my form flickering between human and swarm as I surveyed the transformed landscape of New York City. Zoe materialized beside me, her presence a comforting buzz in the back of my mind. "Another one?" she asked, her voice heavy with concern. I nodded, feeling the weight of leadership settle on my shoulders once more. 3 more disconnected communities in the last week, this time in what used to be upstate New York. The disconnected, humans who had rejected the hive mind, cutting themselves off from the global consciousness we'd built. At first, we'd respected their choice. But lately, their numbers had been growing, and with them, a sense of unease rippled through the collective. "We need to talk to them," Zoe said, her form shifting restlessly. Find out why they're turning away from us. Before I could respond, a familiar presence brushed against my mind. Cassandra, her thoughts as enigmatic as ever. Be careful, her voice echoed in our heads. The balance is more fragile than you know. I frowned, reaching out to locate her, but her presence slipped away like smoke. Ever since the incident in New Mexico, Cassandra had become increasingly elusive, appearing only to deliver cryptic warnings before vanishing again. What do you think she meant? Zoe asked, her compound eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. I shook my head, uncertainty gnawing at me. I don't know, but I think it's time we paid a visit to our disconnected neighbors. We dissolved into our swarm forms, racing north through the cool evening air. As we approached the location of the newest disconnected community, I felt the familiar disorientation of leaving the hive mind's range. We reformed at the edge of a small town, its buildings untouched by the organic growth that had consumed most of the world's cities. A hastily erected barrier surrounded the settlement, crude but effective at disrupting the hive mind's influence. As we approached the gate, a voice called out from a watchtower. That's far enough, state your business. I held up my hands, forcing my form to solidify into its fully human appearance. We're here to talk, to understand why you've chosen to disconnect. There was a long pause, then the sound of hushed conversation. Finally, the gate creaked open, revealing a man in his late 50s, his face weathered and wary. I'm Tom, he said, his hand resting near a holstered pistol. I speak for this community, and you are? I'm Amanda, I replied, fighting the urge to reach out with my mind. And this is Zoe. We're representatives of the hive mind. Tom's expression hardened. We want nothing to do with your hive mind. We've seen what it does to people. Zoe stepped forward, her own form fully human now. What do you mean? The hive mind has brought unity, understanding. At what cost? Tom interrupted, his voice rising. Our individuality? Our free will? No, thank you. We'll take our chances on our own. I felt a flicker of frustration, quickly suppressed. May we come in? Talk to your people? We want to understand your concerns. Tom hesitated, then nodded curtly. You can come in, but any sign of insect business and you're out. Understood? We agreed, following Tom into the town. As we walked, I couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between this place and the world outside. Here, everything was purely human. No organic architecture, no symbiotic insect life. It felt empty. Tom led us to a community center where a crowd had already gathered. Faces peered at us with a mixture of curiosity and fear. All right, Tom said, turning to address us and the crowd. You wanted to talk, so talk. I took a deep breath, suddenly aware of how alien I must seem to these people. We're here because we're concerned. More and more people are choosing to disconnect from the hive mind. We want to understand why. A woman in the crowd spoke up, her voice trembling. You want to know why? Because it's unnatural. Humans aren't meant to be merged with insects. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. But the benefits, Zoe began, but another voice cut her off. Benefits? A young man pushed his way to the front. Like losing yourself? Like feeling the thoughts of billions of others crawling through your mind? I felt a pang of sympathy. It can be overwhelming at first, I admitted. But with time what? Tom interrupted. We become less human, more whatever it is you are now? The crowd was growing restless, anger and fear radiating from them in waves. I realized with a start that I could feel their emotions, even here, outside the hive mind's influence. Listen, I said, raising my voice to be heard over the growing murmurs. I understand your fear. Believe me, I do. When this all started, I was terrified. But what we've become, it's not a loss of humanity. It's an expansion of it. Prove it, Tom challenged, his eyes locked on mine. Show us what's so great about this hive mind of yours. I hesitated, looking to Zoe. She nodded encouragingly. All right, I said, turning back to Tom. But I need a volunteer, someone willing to experience the hive mind, just for a moment. The crowd fell silent, fear and curiosity warring on their faces. Then slowly, a young woman stepped forward. I'll do it, she said. Her voice barely above a whisper. Tom started to protest, but the woman held up her hand. No, Dad. I need to know. We all do. My heart ached at the fear in her eyes, but I admired her courage. What's your name? I asked gently. Sarah, she replied, squaring her shoulders. I nodded, holding out my hand. Okay, Sarah. I'm going to open a small connection to the hive mind. You might feel disoriented at first, but I promise you're in control. You can break the connection at any time. Ready? Sarah took a deep breath, then placed her hand in mine. In that instant, I opened my mind, creating a carefully controlled link to the hive consciousness. Sarah gasped, her eyes widening in wonder. Through our connection, I could feel her amazement, her awe at the vast network of minds she was suddenly privy to. Oh my God, she whispered. It's beautiful. I smiled, guiding her gently through the experience. Focus on your sense of self, I instructed. Feel how it remains intact, even as you connect to something greater. Sarah nodded, her initial fear giving way to curiosity. Through her, I let the gathered crowd experience echoes of the hive mind, the shared knowledge, the sense of unity, the incredible potential of our collective consciousness. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, I gently severed the connection. Sarah staggered slightly and her father rushed to support her. Sarah? Tom asked, his voice thick with concern. Are you okay? What did they do to you? But Sarah was smiling, tears streaming down her face. Dad, she said, her voice filled with wonder. It's not what you think, it's amazing. I felt connected to everything, everyone, but I was still me. A ripple of confusion and interest passed through the crowd. I could see minds changing, fear giving way to curiosity. But before anyone else could step forward, a piercing scream split the air. We all turned to see a woman pointing at the sky, her face a mask of terror. I looked up and felt my heart skip a beat. The sky was wrong. Fractures appeared in the very fabric of reality, jagged lines of impossibility spreading like cracks in a windshield. No, I whispered, a chill running down my spine. Not again. Zoe was at my side in an instant, her form flickering between human and swarm. Amanda, she said, her voice tight with fear. What's happening? I reached out with my expanded senses, feeling the panic spreading through the hive mind. All across the globe, the same phenomenon was occurring. Reality itself was coming apart at the seams. It's what Cassandra warned us about, I realized, my mind racing. The balance. We've disrupted it somehow, as if in response to my words, a familiar presence brushed against my mind. Cassandra materialized before us, her form barely holding together. The disconnected, she said, her voice echoing strangely. They're the key. The hive mind needs them, needs the contrast they provide. Without them, without choice, the balance fails. I turned to Tom and the gathered crowd, seeing the fear and confusion on their faces. We need your help, I said, my voice urgent. All of you. The world, reality itself, it's falling apart. And I think you're the only ones who can save it. Tom looked from me to the fractured sky, then back to his daughter. What do we need to do? He asked, his voice gruff but determined. Choose, I said simply. Freely, without coercion. Choose to connect or to remain apart, but make it a real choice, not one born of fear or misunderstanding. As I spoke, I felt Cassandra's presence growing stronger. Yes, she said, her form solidifying. The hive mind must have its counterpoint. unity and individuality in perfect balance. I turned to the crowd, my heart pounding. I know you're scared. I know this isn't what you wanted. But right now you're the most important people in the world. Your choice, your free will, it might be the only thing holding reality together. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the ominous cracking of the sky above us. Then slowly Sarah stepped forward. I choose to connect, she said, her voice strong and clear. Tom looked at his daughter, a complex mix of emotions playing across his face. Then, with a heavy sigh, he nodded. I choose to remain disconnected, he said. Someone has to remember the old ways. One by one, the members of the community made their choices. Some opted to join the hive mind, their eyes lighting up with wonder as the connection blossomed. Others stood firm with Tom, choosing to remain apart. As the last person made their decision, I felt a shift in the very air around us. The cracks in the sky began to seal, reality knitting itself back together. Cassandra smiled, her form more stable than I'd seen in months. The balance is restored, she said. For now. I turned to Tom, feeling a newfound respect for him and those who had chosen to remain disconnected. Thank you, I said softly. All of you. You've saved us all. Tom nodded gruffly, but I could see the beginnings of understanding in his eyes. Just remember, he said, we're choosing this. To be apart. It's not a failure of your hive mind. It's a necessary part of it. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the transformed landscape, I felt a sense of hope wash through me. We had faced our greatest challenge yet and emerged stronger, more balanced than ever before. The road ahead would still be long and filled with challenges. There would be more choices to make, more balances to maintain. But as I stood there, feeling the pulse of our world echoing through every connected mind and every free individual, I knew we were ready to face whatever the future might bring. The hive mind had found its counterpoint, its necessary opposite. And in that delicate balance I saw the promise of a future brighter and more complex than anything we had dared to imagine. As Zoe and I prepared to leave, spreading the news of our new understanding, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Whatever came next, we would face it together, as individuals, as a hive, as humanity in all its beautiful complexity. Our story was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was only just beginning. A year had passed since the near collapse of reality, and an uneasy equilibrium had settled over the world. The hive and the disconnected coexisted in a delicate balance, each group acutely aware of their dependence on the other. But as autumn painted the landscape in hues of red and gold, a new threat emerged from the shadows of our collective consciousness. I stood at the edge of Central Park, now a sprawling labyrinth of organic architecture and natural wonder. Zoe materialized beside me, her form shimmering into existence from a swarm of monarch butterflies. Amanda, she said, her voice tight with worry. It's happening again. I nodded grimly, feeling the disquiet rippling through the hive mind. How many this time? 17 in the last week, Zoe replied. All of them long-term members of the hive. And the symptoms are getting worse. The symptoms. A shudder ran through my hybrid form at the thought. We'd been calling it hive decay, a progressive deterioration of the mind that left its victims trapped between human consciousness and insect instinct, unable to fully inhabit either state. We need to talk to Cassandra, I said, my resolve hardening. She must know something about this. As if summoned by my words, Cassandra's presence brushed against our minds. But something was wrong. Her thoughts were fragmented, chaotic. The twilight comes. Her voice echoed in our heads, more insectile than human. The hive dims. The balance shifts. Before we could respond, her presence vanished, leaving behind a mental coordinates, a location deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Zoe and I exchanged a worried glance. We have to go, she said, voicing what we both knew. We dissolved into our swarm forms, racing south through the crisp autumn air. As we traveled, I couldn't shake a growing sense of dread. Something fundamental was changing in the hive, and I feared we might already be too late to stop it. We reformed at the base of a mountain, its slopes covered in a riot of fall colors. But amidst the natural beauty, I sensed something alien, a presence that sent shivers through both my human and insect aspects. "There," Zoe said, pointing to a cave entrance half hidden by overgrown vines. As we approached, a figure emerged from the shadows. It took me a moment to recognize Cassandra. Her form was barely humanoid now, a writhing mass of insects held together by sheer will. "You came," she chittered, her voice a discordant blend of human speech and insect sounds. "Good. There isn't much time." "Cassandra," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "What's happening? The hive decay, your warning. What does it all mean?" Cassandra's form rippled, countless tiny bodies shifting in agitation. "It means the end is near. The hive. Our hive. It was never meant to last." "What?" Zoe exclaimed, her own form flickering in distress. "But we've done so much, evolved so far." "Evolved?" Cassandra laughed, a sound like rustling leaves. "No, child, we haven't evolved. We've been infected." The word hit me like a physical blow. Infected? By what? Cassandra gestured for us to follow her into the cave. As we entered, I gasped. The walls were covered in intricate patterns, glowing with a soft bioluminescence. But it wasn't the beauty that shocked me. It was what the patterns depicted. "It's our history," I whispered, recognizing scenes from the early days of the convergence. "But there's more. Things I don't remember." "Things none of us remember," Cassandra said, her compound eyes reflecting the eerie light. "Because they happened long before we were born, before humanity itself existed." She pointed to an image that showed a familiar sight, the tear in reality we'd encountered in New Mexico. But in this depiction, something was emerging from the rift, something vast and incomprehensible. "The entity," Zoe breathed. "The one we thought we'd driven away." Cassandra nodded, her form seeming to grow more insubstantial by the moment. "We didn't drive it away. We couldn't. It's been here all along, sleeping, waiting." "I don't understand," I said, my mind reeling. "Are you saying the entity created the hive mind?" "Not created," Cassandra corrected. "Infected. Humanity was always meant to evolve, to reach a state of collective consciousness. But the entity, it hijacked that process, used us as incubators for its own kind." The implications hit me like a tidal wave. Everything we'd experienced, everything we'd become, it had all been part of some cosmic parasite's life cycle. "The hive decay," Zoe said, horror dawning in her eyes. "It's not a malfunction, it's metamorphosis," Cassandra finished. "The final stage before the entity's offspring emerge, consuming their host in the process." I felt sick, my human revulsion warring with the insect part of me that found the process fascinating. How long do we have?" Cassandra's form flickered, parts of her body dissolving into swarms that quickly rejoined the whole. "Days. Maybe hours. I can feel it starting in myself. Soon, I won't be me anymore. There has to be a way to stop it," I insisted, desperation clawing at my throat. "What about the disconnected? They're not part of the hive. Are they safe?" A sound like chitinous laughter emanated from Cassandra. "Safe? Perhaps. But for how long? Once the entity's children emerge, they'll consume everything. The disconnected will just be dessert." Zoe stepped forward, her form solidifying as she drew on her determination. "Then we fight. We've faced cosmic horrors before. We can do it again." Cassandra's compound eyes fixed on Zoe, a glimmer of her old intelligence shining through. "Brave words, little one. But how do you fight something that's become a part of you? That is you in so many ways." As if to emphasize her point, I felt a wave of alien hunger wash through the hive mind. All across the globe, I sensed humans and insects alike pausing, overwhelmed by a craving for something beyond. No, I said, shaking my head in denial. There has to be a way. Cassandra, please. You wouldn't have called us here if there wasn't hope. Cassandra's form rippled once more, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the woman she had once been. There might be a way, she said, her voice more human than it had been in months. But the cost... oh, the cost would be terrible. Tell us, Zoe and I said in unison. Cassandra turned, pointing to a section of the cave wall we hadn't noticed before. It showed a familiar sight, the hive mind, represented as a vast network of glowing nodes. But at the center of the image was a dark void, a hole in the very fabric of the network. The entity's influence spreads from a central point, Cassandra explained. If that point were to be severed, it might disrupt the metamorphosis. I studied the image, a sick feeling growing in my stomach as I began to understand. The central point. It's a person, isn't it? Someone in the hive. Cassandra nodded, her eyes fixing on me with a terrible sympathy. The first to be infected, the one who brought the hive mind into being. Me, I whispered, the truth hitting me like a physical blow. It's me. Zoe grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear and denial. No, there has to be another way. I can't lose you. But I barely heard her. My mind was racing, pieces falling into place. The strange dreams I'd had before the convergence, my inexplicable connection to the insects, the ease with which I'd taken to the hive mind. It all made sense now. What do I have to do? I asked, my voice steady despite the terror coursing through me. Cassandra's form began to dissolve, her time nearly up. Sever yourself from the hive, completely. Not just disconnected, but excised. It will create a void that the entity can't bridge. But that would kill her, Zoe protested, her form flickering wildly. Cassandra's voice was fading, her body almost entirely dissipated into swarms of insects. Yes, but it might save everyone else. The hive, the disconnected, all of humanity. With those final words, Cassandra vanished, leaving Zoe and me alone in the glowing cave. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of what we'd learned, of the choice before us, was too immense for words. Finally, Zoe turned to me, tears streaming down her face. Amanda, no. We'll find another way. We always do. I reached out, cupping her face in my hands. In that moment, I allowed myself to feel everything, my love for her, my connection to the hive, my fear of what was to come. Zoe, I said softly, you know there's no other way, not in the time we have left. She shook her head, clinging to me desperately. I can't lose you, not after everything we've been through. I pulled her close, feeling her form shift between human and swarm as her emotions warred within her. You won't lose me, I whispered. Not really. I'll always be a part of you, a part of everyone I've touched through the hive. As we held each other, I felt the alien hunger growing stronger, pushing at the edges of my consciousness. We were running out of time. I gently disentangled myself from Zoe's embrace, summoning every ounce of courage I possessed. I need you to do something for me, I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. Zoe nodded, unable to speak. When it's done, when I'm gone, you need to lead them. The hive, the disconnected, all of them. Help them rebuild. Help them find a way to truly evolve, without the entity's influence. Amanda, please, Zoe begged, one last desperate attempt to change my mind. But I was already reaching out to the hive mind, preparing to do what needed to be done. I love you, I said, pouring all my emotion into those 3 words. Always remember that. Before Zoe could respond, I closed my eyes and plunged deep into the heart of the hive consciousness. I felt the entity there, vast and alien, its tendrils wrapped around every connection I'd ever made. With a final silent apology to everyone I was about to leave behind, I gathered every scrap of will I possessed. And then, in one cataclysmic moment, I severed every connection, tearing myself free from the hive mind. The pain was indescribable. Every cell in my body screamed as I ripped away the very thing that had defined me for so long. I was dimly aware of Zoe crying out, of the cave collapsing around us, of a psychic shockwave radiating out across the globe. As darkness closed in, I caught one last glimpse of Zoe's face, contorted in anguish but alive. Safe. In that moment, I knew it had all been worth it. Then, there was nothing. In the days and weeks that followed, the world would struggle to come to terms with what had happened. The hive mind, freed from the entity's influence, would begin to evolve in new and wondrous ways. The disconnected would find their place in this new world order, providing the necessary balance to keep reality stable. And somewhere, in the depths of the collective unconscious, a spark of what had once been Amanda Reynolds would live on. A memory, a legacy, a sacrifice that had saved humanity from a fate worse than death. The hive's twilight had come, but with it, the dawn of a new era. An era of true symbiosis, of balance between unity and individuality. An era that would be shaped by those left behind, carrying forward the lessons learned in the crucible of cosmic horror and human determination. The story wasn't over. In many ways, it was only just beginning. But that would be a tale for another time. 5 years had passed since Amanda's sacrifice. The world had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The hive mind, freed from the entity's influence, had evolved into something new, a collective consciousness that respected individual autonomy while fostering unprecedented cooperation. The disconnected had integrated into society, providing the crucial counterbalance that kept reality stable. But for Zoe, the world would never be the same. She stood atop the organic spire that had once been the Washington Monument, her form flickering between human and swarm as she surveyed the transformed landscape of the nation's capital. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beauty that still failed to touch the void in her heart. "You're brooding again," a voice said from behind her. Zoe turned to see Tom, the former leader of the disconnected community, now her closest advisor and friend. His weathered face bore new lines, etched by years of helping to rebuild a world forever changed. "Can you blame me?" Zoe asked, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "It's been 5 years, Tom. 5 years since—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Even now, the pain of Amanda's loss was too raw. Tom stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I know, but she wouldn't want you to dwell on it. She'd want you to keep moving forward, keep building the world she sacrificed everything for." Zoe nodded, knowing he was right but unable to shake the melancholy that had settled over her. I can't help feeling like we've missed something. Like there's more to the story that we don't understand." Before Tom could respond, a ripple of alarm spread through the hive mind. Zoe's eyes widened as she processed the information flooding in from countless minds across the globe. "What is it?" Tom asked, recognizing the look on her face. "The tear," Zoe whispered, her voice a mix of fear and disbelief. "It's back." Without another word, Zoe dissolved into her swarm form, racing towards the coordinates seared into her memory. Tom, unable to follow, could only watch as she vanished into the darkening sky. Zoe reformed at the edge of a familiar clearing in the New Mexico desert. The secret government facility that had once stood here was long gone, consumed by the organic growth that had swept across the world. But at the center of the clearing, hovering above the ground like a wound in the very air, was a shimmering tear in reality. As she approached, Zoe felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Fear, certainly. The last time this tear had appeared, it had nearly spelled the end of humanity. But also, hope. A desperate, irrational hope that she couldn't quite suppress. "Amanda!" she called out, her voice trembling. "Are you there?" For a long moment there was only silence. Then, from within the tear, a voice responded, familiar yet alien, like a beloved song played on an instrument she'd never heard before. "Zoe, is that you?" Zoe's heart leapt into her throat. "Amanda! Oh my God, Amanda, you're alive!" But as the figure emerged from the tear, Zoe's joy turned to horror. It looked like Amanda, yes, but twisted, changed. Her form was a constantly shifting mass of insects, never quite settling into a recognizable shape. "Not alive," the Amanda thing said, its voice a discordant chorus of human speech and insect sounds. "Not dead. Something in between." Zoe took a step back, her mind reeling. "I don't understand. I thought you were gone." The Amanda thing's form rippled, briefly taking on a more human appearance. "I was. It's complicated. The entity, Zoe. It didn't die when I severed myself from the hive. It just changed. Evolved. And it took you with it," Zoe realized, her heart breaking anew. The Amanda thing nodded, its form dissolving into a swarm of fireflies before coalescing again. "Yes. But not in the way it intended. I've spent 5 years fighting it, Zoe, learning its secrets, understanding its nature, and now I think I know how to truly defeat it." Zoe's mind raced, hope warring with caution. "How? And why come back now?" "Because the fight isn't over," the Amanda thing said, its voice growing urgent. "The entity is weak, yes, but it's regrouping, preparing for a final assault on reality itself. And this time, if it succeeds, there will be nothing left to save." As if in response to its words, the tear in reality began to pulse, expanding outwards. Zoe could feel the fabric of the world straining, reality itself groaning under the pressure. "What do we do?" Zoe asked, pushing aside her shock and confusion. There would be time for that later, if they survived. The Amanda thing's form solidified, becoming more human than it had been since emerging from the tear. "We need to go back, Zoe. Back to where it all began. The Ozark Forest where I first connected with the insects." Zoe nodded, understanding dawning. "The source. The place where the entity first infected our world." "Exactly," Amanda said. And for a moment, she sounded so much like her old self that Zoe's heart ached. "But I can't do it alone. I need you, Zoe. I need the hive mind and the disconnected, every aspect of humanity, working together." Zoe hesitated, torn between her desire to trust Amanda and her fear of what might happen. "How do I know this isn't a trick? That you're really... you?" Amanda's form flickered, a look of pain crossing her face. "You don't. You can't. But Zoe, you once told me that you'd follow me anywhere. Do you remember?" Zoe nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Of course I remember. It was the night before I sacrificed myself," Amanda finished. "I'm asking you to trust me one more time, Zoe, to take a leap of faith, for the sake of everything we've built, everything we've fought for." For a long moment, Zoe said nothing. She reached out with her mind, feeling the pulse of the hive consciousness. She could sense their fear, their uncertainty, but also their determination, their willingness to face whatever might come. "All right," Zoe said finally, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "What's the plan?" Amanda's relief was palpable, her form settling into a more stable configuration. "We need to gather everyone, hive and disconnected alike, bring them to the Ozark Forest, and then we open ourselves up completely, to each other, to the entity, to whatever lies beyond." Zoe's eyes widened. "That's insane. Opening ourselves up to the entity is what caused all this in the first place." "I know," Amanda said, her voice gentle. "But it's different now. We understand what we're facing, and more importantly, we have something the entity doesn't." "What's that?" Zoe asked. Amanda's form shimmered, and for a brief moment Zoe saw the woman she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Choice, Zoe. Free will. The ability to face the unknown and decide our own fate." As Amanda spoke, Zoe felt a ripple of something pass through the hive mind, a sense of purpose, of destiny. She realized with a start that Amanda wasn't just talking to her. She was communicating with every connected mind on the planet. "Will you help me?" Amanda asked, her words echoing in Zoe's mind and in the minds of billions across the globe. "Will you take this final leap with me into the unknown?" The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the world, humans and insects alike answered the call. The hive mind pulsed with determination, while the disconnected reached out in their own way, offering their support. Zoe took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "Let's do this. Together." Amanda nodded, her form beginning to dissolve. "Meet me in the Ozarks." And Zoe, "Thank you for everything." As Amanda vanished back through the tear, Zoe turned her attention to the monumental task ahead, coordinating the movement of billions of people and insects, preparing for a battle that would determine the fate of not just their world, but of reality itself. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Zoe worked tirelessly, using the hive mind to orchestrate the largest migration in human history. Trains, planes, and swarms of insects all converged on the Ozark forest, guided by a shared purpose that transcended individual concerns. Tom and the other disconnected leaders played their part, ensuring that those who remained separate from the hive were included and informed. It was a logistical nightmare, but somehow, impossibly, it all came together. As the appointed hour drew near, Zoe found herself standing at the edge of the forest clearing where it had all begun. Around her, millions of people and countless insects gathered, their collective presence humming with nervous energy. "Are you sure about this?" Tom asked, coming to stand beside her. "It's not too late to back out." Zoe shook her head, her eyes fixed on the center of the clearing where a familiar shimmering tear was beginning to form. "No, it isn't. But we have to try. For Amanda. For all of us." As if summoned by her words, Amanda emerged from the tear. Her form was more stable now, closer to human than it had been in the desert, but there was an otherworldly quality to her, a sense of something vast and incomprehensible just beneath the surface. "It's time," Amanda said, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed gathering. Zoe took a deep breath, then stepped forward. As she moved, she felt the hive mind surge with her, millions of consciousnesses moving as one. Even the disconnected, in their own way, were part of this moment. As Zoe reached Amanda, she held out her hand. "Together?" she asked, echoing a question from what felt like a lifetime ago. Amanda smiled, and for a moment she was entirely herself again. "Together," she agreed, taking Zoe's hand. In that instant, everything changed. Zoe felt her consciousness expand, not just into the familiar channels of the hive mind, but beyond. She saw the entity in all its terrifying vastness, a being of pure thought and endless hunger. But she also saw something else, a spark of humanity, preserved against all odds in the heart of the cosmic horror. Amanda fighting, holding on, refusing to be consumed. And then, with a collective effort that strained the very fabric of reality, they pushed back. Not just Zoe and Amanda, but every mind connected to them. Hive and disconnected, insect and human, all united in a single purpose. The entity reeled, its vast consciousness struggling against the onslaught of human will. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the outcome hung in the balance. Then, with a sound like the birth of a universe, something broke. The entity shattered, its fractured essence scattering across dimensions. And in its wake, something new began to form. As Zoe's consciousness snapped back to her body, she found herself lying on the forest floor, gasping for breath. Around her, others were stirring, looks of wonder and confusion on their faces. Did we do it?" Tom asked, his voice hoarse. Before Zoe could respond, a familiar presence touched her mind. But it was different now. Vast, yet intimately familiar. connected yet distinct. We did it, Amanda's voice echoed, not just in Zoe's head but in the minds of everyone present. But it's not over. It's only just beginning. As Zoe struggled to her feet, she saw Amanda standing at the center of the clearing. But she wasn't alone. Around her, shimmering forms were taking shape, echoes of the entity, transformed by human will and understanding. "What happens now?" Zoe asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Amanda turned to her, a smile playing on her lips. Now we truly evolve. Not as parasites or hosts, but as partners, with the universe itself. As the sun began to rise over the Ozark forest, painting the sky in hues of hope and possibility, Zoe felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and wonders beyond imagining. But they would face it together, as individuals, as a hive, as humanity transformed. And in that moment, Zoe knew that their greatest adventure was only just beginning. The story wasn't over. In many ways, it was starting anew, with chapters yet unwritten stretching out into an infinite future. A future shaped by choice, by understanding, and by the indomitable spirit of humanity in all its beautiful complexity. As Zoe took Amanda's hand once more, she felt the pulse of a new kind of consciousness, not hive, not individual, but something gloriously in between. And she knew, with a certainty that defied explanation, that whatever came next, they were ready for it. Together, they turned to face the dawn of a new era, an era of endless possibility. The hive's twilight had passed, and a new day was breaking, not just for humanity, but for all of creation. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into my wrists as I was roughly shoved into the back of a black SUV. Through the tinted windows, I caught glimpses of a world in chaos. Swarms of insects battling in the sky, people running for cover, buildings crumbling under the onslaught of mandibles and stingers. "You've really done it this time, Dr. Emerson," growled Agent Simmons from the front seat. I'd known him for years, back when he was just a fresh-faced recruit assigned to monitor my research. Now his face was lined with exhaustion and barely contained fury. "I was trying to help, Simmons," I said, my voice hoarse. "You have to believe me." He turned to face me, his eyes hard. "Help? You call this helping? The entire world is at war because of you and your damn bugs." I slumped back in my seat, the weight of guilt pressing down on me. He wasn't entirely wrong. My discovery of the alien insect intelligence in the Ozarks had set off a chain of events that led to this global catastrophe. But I also knew that without my intervention, things could have been far worse. "Where are you taking me?" I asked as we sped through the nearly deserted streets of Washington, D.C. "Somewhere secure," Simmons replied curtly. "Somewhere you can't cause any more trouble." As we drove, I closed my eyes and reached out with my mind, searching for the familiar presence of the insect colony I'd first encountered. Over the years, our connection had grown stronger, allowing me to communicate with them over vast distances. But now, all I sensed was chaos and fear. Suddenly, a sharp pain lanced through my skull. My eyes flew open and I gasped. "What is it?" demanded Simmons, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. "They're dying," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "So many of them, all at once." Simmons exchanged a worried glance with the driver. "Who's dying?" "The insects," I said. "Both species. The battle, it's reaching a critical point." As if to emphasize my words, a massive swarm of the aggressive, genetically modified insects we'd encountered in the Amazon suddenly filled the sky above us. The driver swerved, narrowly avoiding a collision as the insects smashed into cars and buildings around us. "Get us to the facility now," Simmons barked. We screeched to a halt in front of a nondescript office building. Simmons yanked me out of the car, keeping a firm grip on my arm as we hurried inside. The lobby was a hive of activity, with harried-looking government officials and military personnel rushing about. "Sir," a young aide ran up to us, her face pale. "We've lost contact with the West Coast. The insect swarms have taken out most of our communications infrastructure. Simmons cursed under his breath. Get me the Secretary of Defense. We need to implement the Scorched Earth Protocol. My blood ran cold. Scorched Earth? You can't be serious. He rounded on me, his face inches from mine. This is what happens when we let idealistic scientists meddle in things they don't understand. We're going to end this once and for all. You'll kill millions of people along with the insects, I protested. Better millions than billions, he snarled. Or would you prefer we let your precious bugs inherit the earth? Before I could respond, the building shook with a tremendous impact. Dust rained down from the ceiling and alarm klaxons began to blare. We're under attack, someone shouted. Simmons shoved me towards a nearby stairwell. Get him to the bunker. As we descended into the bowels of the building, I felt a familiar presence brush against my mind. Hope surged through me. They were here. The stairwell door burst open, and a wave of my original insect allies poured in. They formed a protective barrier around me, their bodies vibrating with determination and loyalty. Stand down, Simmons yelled, drawing his weapon. I will not hesitate to open fire. Wait, I shouted, stepping forward with my hands raised. They're not here to attack. They're trying to protect me, to protect all of us. Simmons's finger tightened on the trigger. Protect us? These things have brought nothing but destruction. I took a deep breath, knowing I had only one chance to make him understand. Simmons, listen to me. The insects I first encountered, they're not our enemy. They're refugees, just like we'll be if we don't find a way to stop this war. His aim wavered slightly. What are you talking about? Their home world was destroyed by the same kind of conflict we're facing now, I explained. They came here hoping to find peace, to coexist with us. But our fear and our greed twisted everything. A distant explosion rocked the building, sending cracks spiderwebbing across the walls. We don't have much time, I pleaded. Let me help. Let me try to communicate with both species, to find a way to end this. For a long moment, Simmons stood frozen, his gaze darting between me and the insects surrounding us. Finally, he lowered his weapon. If you're wrong about this, Emerson, I'll put you down myself, he growled. I nodded, relief flooding through me. I understand. With Simmons's reluctant approval, we made our way to the roof of the building. The scene that greeted us was apocalyptic. The sky was dark with warring insects, their battles casting strange, shifting shadows over the ruined city below. I closed my eyes and opened my mind, reaching out to both insect species. The familiar, comforting presence of my original allies was there, but now I also sensed the chaotic, rage-filled consciousness of the genetically modified aggressors. My name is Dr. Alice Emerson, I projected, using every ounce of mental strength I possessed. I speak to you on behalf of humanity and in the name of peace. The swarms around us paused in their combat, millions of tiny heads turning in unison to face me. I know you're afraid, I continued. I know you're angry. But this war will destroy us all if we don't find a way to stop it. The aggressive insects buzzed menacingly, their thoughts a jumble of hatred and pain. I realized with a start that they were lashing out not out of malice, but out of fear and confusion. The experiments performed on them had left them traumatized and unable to properly process their heightened intelligence. You were born into a world that didn't understand you, I said to them. You were treated as weapons, not as living beings, but it doesn't have to be this way. I turned to my original insect allies. And you, my friends. You came to our world seeking refuge, but our mistakes have brought you to the brink of extinction once again. I am so sorry for the pain we've caused you. Waves of emotion washed over me. Sorrow, anger, hope, fear. The insect's collective consciousness was a maelstrom of conflicting feelings. But we have a chance now, I pressed on. A chance to learn from our mistakes, to build a world where all species can coexist in harmony. I felt a shift in the air, a subtle change in the buzzing that surrounded us. Slowly, cautiously, Representatives from both insect species approached me. Simmons tensed beside me, his hand moving to his weapon, but I held up a hand to stop him. "It's okay," I whispered. "They're listening." The insects landed on my outstretched arms, their delicate feet tickling my skin. I opened my mind fully to them, allowing them to see my memories, my hopes, my fears. In return, I was flooded with their experiences, the terror of fleeing a dying world, the pain of forced evolution, the longing for understanding. Tears streamed down my face as I absorbed it all. "We can help each other," I said softly. "We can learn from each other. But first, we have to stop fighting." For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, nothing happened. Then slowly, the two groups of insects began to mingle. Their hostile buzzing transformed into something almost melodic, a humming that seemed to resonate with the very air around us. Simmons stared in disbelief. "I'll be damned," he muttered. "You actually did it." But our victory was short-lived. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and I looked up to see a squadron of military jets approaching. "No," I cried out. "Simmons, you have to stop them." He was already on his radio shouting orders. "Stand down. I repeat, all forces stand down. We have a ceasefire." The jets veered off at the last moment, but not before one of them launched a missile. Time seemed to slow as I watched its fiery trail arc towards us. Without hesitation, both groups of insects swarmed together, forming a living shield between us and the oncoming projectile. The missile detonated, and I was thrown backward by the force of the explosion. When the smoke cleared, I saw a horrifying sight. Thousands of insect bodies lay scattered across the rooftop, their sacrifice having saved us from certain death. I fell to my knees, overcome with grief. But then I felt it, a stirring in the air, a resurgence of that melodic hum. The surviving insects were rallying, their shared trauma now binding them together in a way I had never thought possible. As I watched in awe, the two once hostile species began to work in concert, clearing away the debris and tending to their wounded. It was a small miracle, a glimpse of the cooperation I had dreamed of fostering between our species. Simmons helped me to my feet, his expression a mix of wonder and lingering skepticism. "So what happens now, Dr. Emerson?" I took a deep breath, looking out over the battered city. The insect swarms were dispersing, no longer intent on destruction but beginning the long process of repair. "Now," I said, "we rebuild, together." The days that followed were a blur of activity. As news of the ceasefire spread, the world held its collective breath, waiting to see if this fragile peace would hold. I worked tirelessly, serving as an intermediary between the insect species and world leaders. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments of fear and misunderstanding that threatened to plunge us back into conflict. But slowly, painfully, we began to make progress. 1 month after the rooftop encounter, I stood before the United Nations General Assembly, flanked by representatives of both insect species. The chamber was packed, with delegates from every nation eager to hear our proposal. "Distinguished delegates," I began, my voice carrying across the hushed room. "We stand at a crossroads in human history. The path behind us is stained with blood and marked by our failures, but the path ahead offers us an unprecedented opportunity." I gestured to the insects beside me. These beings, whom we once feared and fought, have shown us the true meaning of resilience and forgiveness. They have agreed to share their advanced technology and knowledge with us, to help us heal our planet and reach for the stars. A murmur ran through the assembly. I could see the mix of hope and apprehension on the faces before me. "But this is not a one-sided arrangement," I continued. "In return, we must pledge to protect them, to provide them with safe habitats where they can thrive. We must learn to coexist, to see them not as other, but as fellow inhabitants of Earth." I paused, looking out over the sea of faces. The choice before us is simple, yet monumental. We can cling to our fear and prejudice, continuing down a path that leads only to mutual destruction. or we can embrace this chance for a new beginning, for a future where humans and insects work together to overcome the challenges that face us all. As I finished speaking, the chamber erupted in applause. It wasn't unanimous. I could see pockets of resistance, delegates who sat with arms crossed and faces set in stone. But they were in the minority. Over the next few hours, questions were asked, concerns were raised, and debates raged. But in the end, the vote was clear. The United Nations Interspecies Cooperation Act was passed with an overwhelming majority. As we left the UN building, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. There was still so much work to be done, so many challenges to overcome. But for the first time since this all began, I felt real hope for the future. Simmons was waiting for us outside, a wry smile on his face. "Never thought I'd see the day when I'd be providing security for a bunch of bugs," he said, shaking his head. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Life's full of surprises, Simmons. Speaking of which, how would you like a new assignment? We're going to need good people to help manage our new interspecies research facilities." He raised an eyebrow. "You're offering me a job?" "Consider it a peace offering," I said, extending my hand. "What do you say? Ready to help make history?" Simmons looked at my hand, then at the insects hovering nearby. After a moment's hesitation, he grasped my hand firmly. "Why the hell not? Someone's got to keep you out of trouble." As we walked towards the waiting cars, I felt a gentle brush against my mind, a message of gratitude and hope from my insect allies. I smiled, looking up at the sky that no longer seemed like a battlefield, but a frontier of endless possibilities. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but together, humans and insects, former enemies now united, I knew we could face whatever the future held. A new chapter in Earth's history had begun, and I couldn't wait to see where it would lead us. The deafening buzz of insect wings filled the air as I stood before the warring factions. Millions of tiny bodies darkened the sky, their collective fury palpable even from the ground. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "You sure about this, Doc?" Agent Simmons asked, his hand hovering near his holstered weapon. I nodded, though my trembling hands betrayed my uncertainty. "It's our only shot." Closing my eyes, I reached out with my mind, tapping into the psychic link I'd developed with the original insect colony. Their familiar presence washed over me, a symphony of alien thoughts and emotions. "My friends," I projected, my mental voice straining to be heard above the psychic cacophony. "I know you're afraid. I know you're angry. But we must end this conflict before it's too late." A tendril of acknowledgement brushed against my consciousness. They were listening. I turned my attention to the aggressive, genetically modified insects, the ones we'd inadvertently created through our misguided experiments. Their minds were a swirling maelstrom of rage and pain, almost overwhelming in their intensity. "I know you're suffering," I continued, fighting to maintain my mental footing. "The experiments performed on you were cruel and misguided. But this destruction won't heal your pain. It will only breed more suffering." For a moment, the buzzing seemed to lessen. A flicker of curiosity rippled through the swarm. I pressed on, emboldened by this small victory. "We can find a way forward together, a way to coexist, to heal the wounds of the past." Suddenly, a lance of agony shot through my skull. I stumbled, nearly falling to my knees. "Dr. Emerson," Simmons shouted, rushing to my side. "What's happening?" I waved him off, gritting my teeth against the pain. "They're fighting me, fighting each other. The conflict in their minds, it's tearing them apart." As if to punctuate my words, the sky erupted into chaos. The two insect factions clashed in a frenzy of stingers and mandibles, their bodies raining down around us like a grotesque hailstorm. "We need to fall back," Simmons yelled, tugging at my arm. "It's not safe." But I stood my ground, even as my nose began to bleed from the psychic strain. "No, we can't give up now, we're so close." I redoubled my mental efforts, pushing through the pain to project a vision of peace, of humans and insects working together to rebuild our shattered world. For a fleeting moment, I felt a spark of hope ignite in the collective consciousness of both swarms. Then everything went wrong. A piercing shriek cut through the air, causing both humans and insects to recoil in pain. I looked up to see a new swarm descending upon us. Larger, more vicious-looking insects unlike any I'd encountered before. "What the hell are those?" Simmons gasped, his face pale with shock. Dread pooled in my stomach as realization dawned. "They're hybrids," I whispered. "A combination of both species. Dear God, what have we done?" The hybrid swarm attacked with terrifying efficiency, tearing through the ranks of both original factions. Their minds were a jumble of conflicting instincts and memories driven by an all-consuming hunger that defied reason. In that moment of horror, an idea struck me. Desperate, dangerous, but possibly our only hope. "I need to merge with them," I said, my voice barely audible above the carnage. Simmons stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Merge? What the hell are you talking about?" "My consciousness," I explained hurriedly. "If I can join with both species, become a bridge between them, maybe I can find a way to end this." "That's insane," Simmons protested. "It'll kill you." I met his gaze, a sad smile tugging at my lips. "Maybe. But if it saves humanity, saves all of us, isn't it worth the risk?" Before he could argue further, I closed my eyes and opened my mind completely. I felt my consciousness expand, reaching out to encompass the warring swarms. The pain was indescribable. Millions of alien thoughts and memories flooded my mind, threatening to drown my sense of self. I screamed, my body convulsing as it struggled to contain the vast ocean of insect consciousness. Through the haze of agony, I dimly heard Simmons shouting for a medical team, but his voice seemed to come from a great distance, growing fainter by the second as I sank deeper into the collective mind of the swarm. Eons of evolution flashed before my mind's eye. I witnessed the birth of the first insects, their struggle for survival in a harsh primordial world. I felt the pride of the first flight, the terror of near-extinction events, the wonder of complex societies forming. Then came the memories of the original alien colony, their advanced civilization, their desperate flight from a dying world, their hope upon finding Earth. Intertwined with these were the memories of the genetically modified insects, the pain of forced evolution, the confusion of newfound intelligence, the rage at their mistreatment, and beneath it all, a deep, primal hunger that threatened to consume everything. I don't know how long I floated in that sea of alien consciousness. Time seemed to lose all meaning. But slowly, painfully, I began to reassert my own identity. I am Alice Emerson, I thought, clinging to the memory of my name like a lifeline. I am human, but I am also of the swarm. I am the bridge. With monumental effort, I began to sort through the chaotic tangle of thoughts and instincts. I searched for common ground, for shared desires and fears that could unite rather than divide. And there, in the depths of that collective mind, I found it, a spark of something universal, a longing for home, for safety, for understanding. It existed in every consciousness, from the simplest drone to the most complex hybrid. "We are not so different," I projected, my mental voice growing stronger. "We all seek to survive, to thrive, to leave something behind. We can do that together." The maelstrom of thoughts began to calm, order emerging from chaos. I felt the distinct consciousnesses of the three factions, original, modified, and hybrid, begin to align, finding harmony where before there had only been discord. With a final, heroic effort, I pushed my understanding, my vision of a shared future, to every mind connected to the swarm. The effect was instantaneous. The sound of battle abruptly ceased, replaced by an eerie silence. I opened my eyes to find the air filled with motionless insects, their bodies glinting in the fading sunlight. "My God," Simmons breathed, his eyes wide with awe. "You did it." I tried to respond, but my legs gave out beneath me. As darkness crept in at the edges of my vision, I saw the insects begin to descend, forming intricate patterns on the ground around me. "Medic!" Simmons bellowed, catching me before I hit the ground. "Hold on, Doc, just hold on." I wanted to tell him it was okay, that I could feel the change we'd wrought. But my body had reached its limit. As consciousness slipped away, I sent one final thought to the swarm. Remember, coexist, thrive. Then the world went black. I awoke to the steady beep of hospital machinery and the smell of antiseptic. My entire body ached, and my head felt like it had been split open and poorly reassembled. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Doc." I turned my head, wincing at the movement, to see Simmons sitting beside my bed, looking haggard, but relieved. "How long?" I croaked, my throat dry and raw. 3 weeks, he replied, offering me a cup of water. "You had us worried there for a while." As I sipped the blessedly cool liquid, memories of what had happened came flooding back. I bolted upright, ignoring the protest of my battered body. "The insects, what happened? Did it work?" Simmons gently pushed me back onto the pillows. "Easy there. Why don't you see for yourself?" He pressed a button, and the blinds covering the window slowly retracted. I gasped at the sight that greeted me. The city outside was transformed. Gleaming structures of an alien yet oddly beautiful design now stood alongside familiar human architecture. And everywhere, insects and humans moved together in perfect harmony. I saw workers, both human and insect, repairing damaged buildings. Parks teemed with children playing alongside iridescent beetles the size of dogs. In the distance, a massive dragonfly-like creature soared between skyscrapers, carrying what looked like cargo. "It's been a hell of an adjustment period," Simmons said, a note of wonder in his voice. "But I'll be damned if we aren't making it work." Tears welled in my eyes as I took in the scene. It's more beautiful than I ever imagined. A gentle buzzing drew my attention to the window. A small group of insects, representatives of all 3 factions, hovered outside, their antennae waving in what I somehow knew was a gesture of gratitude. I placed my hand against the glass, smiling through my tears. "You're welcome," I whispered, "and thank you." As the insects flew off to rejoin the bustling life of our new shared world, I leaned back in my bed, exhausted, but filled with hope. "So, Doc," Simmons said, a hint of his old skepticism creeping into his voice. "What's next?" I closed my eyes, feeling the faint but ever-present connection to the swarm humming in the back of my mind. A smile tugged at my lips as I contemplated the infinite possibilities stretching out before us. "Now, my friend," I said softly, "we learn to fly." The pain was exquisite, a symphony of agony that threatened to tear my mind apart. Millions upon millions of alien thoughts crashed through my consciousness like a tsunami, each one a knife's edge of memory and instinct. I screamed, but no sound escaped my lips. My body convulsed on the cold, hard ground as Simmons and the medical team swarmed around me, their voices a distant buzz beneath the roar in my head. "She's coding," someone shouted. "We're losing her." But I was beyond their reach now, plummeting through an endless void of insectoid consciousness. Fragments of alien lives flashed before me. The desperate flight from a dying world, galaxies away. The fear and confusion of forced evolution in sterile labs. The primal hunger of the hybrids, driven by instincts they couldn't understand. I was drowning in a sea of otherness, my sense of self eroding with each passing second. Who was I? Alice Emerson? The swarm? Both? Neither? Just as I felt the last threads of my humanity slipping away, a small, quiet voice spoke from the depths of my mind. "Hold on, Alice. Remember who you are." My mother's voice, long silenced by cancer, now a lifeline in this maelstrom of alien thought. I clung to it, desperately trying to reassert my identity. "I am Alice Emerson," I thought, the words feeling strange and foreign. I am human. I am the bridge. Slowly, agonizingly, I began to make sense of the chaos swirling around me. The disparate streams of consciousness started to align, finding common ground in shared experiences and emotions. Fear, hope, the desire to survive, to thrive, to understand. We are not so different, I projected, my mental voice growing stronger. We can coexist. We can learn from each other. The psychic storm began to calm, order emerging from chaos. I felt the distinct consciousnesses of the three factions, original, modified, and hybrid, begin to harmonize, creating a melody of understanding where before there had only been discord. And then, in a moment of perfect clarity, I saw the key to peace between all species. It wasn't about suppressing our differences or forcing assimilation. It was about embracing the unique strengths of each, creating a symbiosis greater than the sum of its parts. With the last reserves of my strength, I pushed this understanding outward, projecting it to every mind connected to the swarm. The effect was like a psychic supernova. My eyes flew open and I gasped, sucking in a lungful of air as if I'd been underwater for hours. The pain receded, replaced by a strange, tingling sensation that spread throughout my body. "She's back," a paramedic shouted. "Vitals stabilizing." Simmons' face swam into view, his eyes wide with a mixture of relief and horror. "Jesus Christ, Doc. What the hell happened to you?" I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. Something felt different. Wrong, but also right in a way I couldn't explain. I raised a hand to my face and froze. My skin had taken on a faint, iridescent sheen, almost chitinous in texture. I could feel new sensory inputs flooding my brain, the vibrations in the air, the subtle shifts in electromagnetic fields, the complex chemical signatures of pheromones. "Mirror," I croaked. "I need a mirror." Simmons hesitated, then nodded to one of the paramedics. They returned a moment later with a small, compact mirror. I steeled myself and looked. The face staring back at me was both familiar and alien. My eyes, once a dull brown, now shimmered with compound facets. Delicate antennae sprouted from my forehead, twitching slightly as they sensed the air around me. I should have been horrified. Instead, I felt a strange sense of completion, as if a part of me I never knew was missing had finally slotted into place. "Fascinating," I murmured, my voice carrying a slight buzz. The merger wasn't just mental, it was physical as well. Simmons looked like he was about to be sick. "Doc, we need to get you to a secure facility. We don't know what kind of effects this could have, what kind of danger you might pose." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "No, Simmons. No more labs, no more secrets. This is what we needed. A true bridge between species." I stood marveling at the new strength and agility I felt coursing through my transformed body. All around us, the insects had gone still, awaiting direction. "It's time," I said, my voice carrying on both audible and psychic frequencies. "Time to show the world what we can accomplish together." What followed was a whirlwind of activity that would forever change the course of human history. As news of the ceasefire spread, so too did images of our new reality. Massive insectoid structures began to appear in cities worldwide, their organic architecture a stark contrast to human designs. Swarms of insects, now directed by a collective intelligence, worked alongside humans to repair the damage done by our conflict. There was fear, of course. Riots broke out in some areas, people unable to accept the New World Order. But as the benefits of our symbiosis became clear, rapid advancements in technology, medicine, and environmental restoration, resistance began to fade. Through it all, I stood as the linchpin, the living proof that coexistence was possible. 3 months after my transformation, I found myself standing before the United Nations General Assembly. The chamber buzzed with nervous energy, Human delegates intermingled with insectoid representatives. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of two species' hopes resting on my shoulders. Distinguished delegates, I began, my voice carrying clearly despite its inhuman timbre. We stand at a crossroads in the history of not just humanity, but of Earth itself. I gestured to the insects hovering nearby. These beings, whom we once feared and fought, have shown us the true meaning of adaptation and forgiveness. They offer us knowledge beyond our wildest dreams, the key to healing our planet and reaching for the stars. A murmur ran through the assembly. I could sense the mix of hope and apprehension radiating from both humans and insects alike. But this gift comes with great responsibility, I continued. We must learn to see beyond our differences to recognize the strength in diversity. The path ahead will not be easy. There will be challenges, misunderstandings, and fears to overcome. I paused, looking out over the sea of faces, both human and insectoid. Yet I stand before you as living proof that harmony is possible. In my body and mind, human and insect have merged, creating something greater than either could be alone. This is the future we must strive for. Not assimilation, but true symbiosis. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of applause and buzzing. It wasn't unanimous. I could sense pockets of resistance, minds still clouded by fear and mistrust, but they were in the minority. As the session concluded and treaties were signed, I felt a familiar presence approach. Simmons, looking uncomfortable in his formal suit, sidled up to me. "Hell of a speech, Doc," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "Never thought I'd see the day when I'd be applauding a bunch of bugs." "No offense," he added quickly, glancing at my antennae. I laughed, the sound a strange mix of human and insect tones. "None taken, though I prefer the term multi-species ambassador these days." Simmons snorted. "Yeah, well, whatever you want to call yourself, you've turned the whole world upside down. You sure we're ready for all this?" I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the subtle flinch he couldn't quite suppress at my touch. "Ready or not, it's here. The only way forward is together." As we left the UN building, a swarm of media descended upon us. Human reporters with cameras and microphones, insectoid drones transmitting directly to the hive mind. Questions flew from all directions. "Dr. Emerson, how does it feel to be the first human-insect hybrid? Is it true that the insect technology can reverse climate change? Are there plans to offer the hybridization process to others?" I held up my hands, calling for quiet. "All of your questions will be answered in time. For now, know that we are working tirelessly to ensure a smooth transition into our new shared world. The future is bright, but it will take all of us, human and insect alike, to realize its full potential." As the crowd dispersed, I felt a gentle tug on my consciousness. A message from the swarm. There was work to be done, a new hive to be built in the heart of New York City. I turned to Simmons, a smile playing on my transformed features. "Care to lend a hand with some urban renovation? I promise it'll be an experience you'll never forget." He sighed, but I could sense the curiosity warring with his ingrained caution. "Why the hell not? Someone's got to keep an eye on you and make sure you don't sprout wings or something." As we made our way through the bustling streets, I marveled at the changes already taking place. Humans and insects working side by side, buildings being retrofitted with organic technology, the air cleaner than it had been in centuries. It wasn't perfect. There would be struggles ahead, misunderstandings to overcome, and new challenges we couldn't even imagine yet. But for the first time since this all began, I felt true hope for the future. A future where the lines between species blurred, where the sum of our differences created something greater than we could have ever achieved alone. As I felt the comforting hum of the swarm's collective consciousness in the back of my mind, I smiled. The metamorphosis was just beginning, for all of us. And oh, what a brave new world it would be. The sun rose over a world transformed. I stood atop the gleaming spire of the New York Hive, my compound eyes taking in the sprawling metropolis below. The city that never sleeps had become the city that never stops evolving. Massive organic structures now intertwined with the steel and glass of human architecture, creating a skyline that would have been unimaginable just a year ago. Streets buzzed with activity, humans and insects moving in perfect synchronicity, each complementing the other's strengths. I felt a presence approach and turned to see Simmons, his face still showing traces of the wonder he felt every time he visited the hive. "Morning, Doc," he said, handing me a steaming cup of what passed for coffee these days, a symbiotic blend of caffeine and nutrient-rich insect secretions. "Hell of a view up here." I nodded, taking a sip of the oddly sweet concoction. "It never gets old, does it?" Simmons grunted, leaning against the biochemical railing. "You know, there are still days I wake up thinking this has all been some crazy dream. That I'll look out my window and see good old New York, full of taxis and tourists and not a 6-foot beetle in sight." I chuckled, the sound a strange mix of human laughter and insectoid clicking. "Having second thoughts about your role as human-insect liaison?" He shook his head, a wry smile playing on his lips. "Nah, someone's got to keep an eye on you bug people. Make sure you don't get any ideas about world domination or anything." "I think that ship has sailed, my friend," I said, gesturing to the hybrid city below us. Though I prefer to think of it as world collaboration. Our banter was interrupted by a gentle nudge against my consciousness, a message from the hive mind. I closed my eyes, letting the information flow through me. "The first harvesting is complete," I said, opening my eyes. "The environmental restoration drones have successfully removed 70% of the microplastics from the Pacific garbage patch." Simmons whistled low. "In what, 3 days? Damn. I guess there are some perks to this whole Insect Alliance thing." I was about to respond when another more urgent message pushed its way into my mind. My antennae twitched, picking up on the subtle pheromone shifts in the air that signaled distress. "Something's wrong," I muttered, my voice taking on the slight buzz that emerged when I was agitated. "There's been an incident at the Chicago Hive." Simmons straightened, all traces of joviality gone from his face. "What kind of incident?" I shook my head, already moving towards the organic elevator that would take us to the command center. "I'm not sure yet, but it's bad. We need to go. Now." The command center was a marvel of human and insect engineering. Holographic displays projected real-time data from hives across the globe, while human operators worked alongside insectoid interfaces, their minds linked directly to the system. As we entered, all eyes, both human and compound, turned to us. "Report!" I barked, my voice carrying on both audible and psychic frequencies. A young woman, Sarah, I think her name was, stepped forward, her eyes glowing faintly with the neural implants that allowed her to communicate directly with the hive. "Dr. Emerson, we've got a situation in Chicago," she said, her voice tight with tension. "There's been an attack on the hive, some kind of biological agent. It's tearing through the collective mind like wildfire." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Show me." The main holographic display flickered to life, showing a 3D representation of the Chicago Hive. Large sections of it were pulsing an angry red, spreading outward like a cancer. "Oh God," Simmons breathed. "How many?" Sarah swallowed hard. "Current estimates put the casualties at over 100,000, both human and insect." The room fell silent, the weight of those numbers settling over us like a shroud. I closed my eyes, reaching out with my mind to touch the Chicago collective. The pain that greeted me was overwhelming, a psychic scream of agony and confusion that nearly brought me to my knees. "Cut the connection," Simmons shouted, catching me as I stumbled. I waved him off, gritting my teeth against the onslaught. "No, I need to understand what we're dealing with." Pushing through the pain, I delved deeper into the wounded hive mind. Flashes of memory assaulted me, the sudden onset of the attack, the feeling of minds being twisted and torn apart, the desperate attempts to contain the spread, and beneath it all, a familiar presence. a mind I had hoped never to encounter again. I pulled back, gasping for air as I severed the connection. "Doc? Doc, talk to me," Simmons urged, his face etched with concern. "What did you see?" I met his gaze, my compound eyes reflecting the grim reality we now faced. "It's Henderson," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's back." The name sent a ripple of tension through the room. Dr. James Henderson, the brilliant but unstable geneticist who had spearheaded the original insect modification program. The man whose unethical experiments had nearly doomed us all. The man we thought had died in the final battle for symbiosis. "That's impossible," Simmons growled. "I saw him go down myself. There's no way he could have survived." I shook my head, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "He didn't just survive, Simmons, he evolved." I turned to the assembled team, my mind already racing with possible countermeasures. Henderson always believed that humanity should dominate the insects, not work alongside them. This attack, it's not just meant to kill, it's meant to enslave. Sarah's eyes widened in horror. "You mean?" I nodded grimly. "The biological agent isn't destroying the hive mind, it's rewriting it, twisting it to Henderson's will." "Jesus," Simmons muttered. "So what's the play, Doc? How do we stop this?" I squared my shoulders, feeling the weight of two species resting upon them. "We fight fire with fire. If Henderson has evolved to interface with the hive mind, then so must we." I turned to Sarah. "Prepare the crucible. We're going to attempt a full integration." A hush fell over the room. The crucible, our most closely guarded secret. A chamber designed to push the limits of human-insect hybridization beyond anything we had yet attempted. Simmons grabbed my arm, his face a mask of concern. "Doc, you can't be serious. We have no idea what a full integration might do to you. You could lose yourself entirely." I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the subtle flinch he still couldn't quite suppress at my touch. "It's a risk we have to take, old friend. Henderson has to be stopped no matter the cost." As the team scrambled to prepare the crucible, I took a moment to center myself. I reached out to the New York hive mind, drawing strength and resolve from the millions of minds connected to it. "My friends," I projected, my thoughts carrying to every corner of the city. "A great threat has emerged, one that strikes at the very heart of our symbiosis. I go now to face this threat, to protect all that we have built together." I felt waves of concern, fear, and determination wash over me from the collective consciousness. "Some of you knew me when I was fully human," I continued. "Others have only known me as I am now, a bridge between our species. But after today, I may be something else entirely." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Whatever happens, know that every choice I make, every sacrifice I endure, is for the future we have dreamed of together. A future of true harmony between all forms of life on this planet." As I withdrew from the connection, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Simmons, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You know, when all this insect business started, I thought you were the craziest son of a bitch I'd ever met," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Now look at you, saving the world. Again." I managed a small smile. "I couldn't have done it without you, Simmons. You've been a true friend through all of this." He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the display of sentiment. "Yeah, well, someone had to keep you from going full bug, right? Now come on, let's go kick Henderson's ass back to whatever rock he crawled out from under." The crucible was a marvel of bioengineering, a pulsing, organic chamber that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. As I stepped inside, I felt the familiar tingle of alien technology interfacing with my hybrid physiology. "Initiating full integration sequence," Sarah's voice came through the speakers. "Dr. Emerson, are you ready?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Do it." The world exploded into light and sensation. Every nerve in my body felt like it was on fire, every synapse firing at once. I screamed, but the sound was lost in the roar of a million insect minds pouring into my consciousness. I was everywhere and nowhere, my sense of self stretching to encompass the entire hive network. I could feel every drone, every worker, every queen across the globe. Their thoughts, their experiences, their very essence became a part of me. And there, in the heart of the Chicago hive, I felt him. Henderson. His mind was a twisted mockery of symbiosis, a cancerous growth feeding on the collective consciousness. "Hello, Alice," his voice echoed through the hive mind, dripping with malice. "I was wondering when you'd join the party." I gathered my strength, pushing back against his influence. "It's over, Henderson. You've lost." His laughter reverberated through the psychic plane. "Lost? My dear, I've only just begun. Humanity was meant to rule, not coexist. And with the power of the hive at my command, I'll reshape this world as it always should have been." I could feel him probing at my defenses, seeking a way to corrupt my connection to the hive. But where he sought to dominate, I offered partnership. Where he demanded obedience, I asked for cooperation. "You're wrong, James," I said, my voice carrying the weight of millions. "True strength comes from unity, not subjugation. Let me show you." With that, I opened myself fully to the hive mind, letting the full force of our shared consciousness flow through me. Every triumph, every setback, every moment of beauty and discovery we had experienced together, I laid it all bare. I felt Henderson's shock, his disbelief at the depth of the connection. "Impossible," he sputtered. "The human mind can't possibly—" "Not alone," I agreed. "But we're not alone anymore, James. We never have to be again." For a moment, I sensed a flicker of longing in him, a deep-seated desire for the connection he had denied himself in his quest for power. I reached out, offering him a chance at redemption. "It's not too late," I said softly. "You can still be a part of this. You can still help us build a better world." For a heartbeat, I thought I had reached him. But then his mind hardened, rage and hatred flooding through the psychic link. "Never," he roared. "I'll die before I submit to the whims of lesser beings." I felt him gathering his strength for one final devastating attack. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. "I'm sorry, James," I whispered. "But the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few." With every ounce of will I possessed, I reached out to the farthest corners of the hive network. I drew upon the strength of every mind connected to it, human and insect alike. Their hopes, their dreams, their very essence flowed through me. And then I brought it all crashing down upon Henderson's corrupted consciousness. The psychic backlash was catastrophic. I felt Henderson's mind shatter under the onslaught, his influence on the Chicago hive disintegrating in an instant. But the cost was high. As Henderson's presence faded from the network, I felt my own sense of self beginning to unravel. The borders between Alice Emerson and the hive mind were blurring, my individual consciousness threatening to disperse into the vast ocean of shared thought. I was dimly aware of alarms blaring in the physical world, of Simmons's voice shouting for the technicians to pull me out. But it all seemed so distant, so unimportant compared to the infinite expanse of the hive mind. Why hold on to this limited form when I could be one with everything? Just as I was about to let go, to allow myself to dissolve into the collective, a memory surfaced. My mother's voice, the same one that had anchored me during my first transformation. "Remember who you are, Alice. You are the bridge." The words echoed through the vastness of the hive mind, reminding me of my purpose. I was not meant to lose myself in the collective, but to stand as a living link between two worlds. With monumental effort, I began to reassert my identity. I was Alice Emerson. I was human and insect, individual and collective. I was the bridge. Slowly, painfully, I felt myself coalescing back into a singular consciousness. The overwhelming input from the hive mind receded to a manageable hum in the back of my awareness. I opened my eyes to find myself lying on the floor of the crucible, surrounded by concerned faces. Simmons knelt beside me, his usual gruff demeanor replaced by naked worry. "Doc, you with us?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. I nodded weakly, my entire body feeling like one massive bruise. "I'm here," I croaked. "We did it. Henderson's gone." A cheer went up from the assembled team, but Simmons' eyes remained locked on mine. "And you? Are you? I took a moment to assess myself, feeling the changes wrought by the full integration. My connection to the hive mind was stronger than ever, yet I remained distinctly Alice. "I'm me," I assured him. "Just more." As the medical team helped me to my feet, I reached out to the hive mind once more. I felt the last traces of Henderson's influence fading away, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and unity. "It's over," I projected, my thoughts carrying to every hive across the globe. "We are safe. We are one. And together we will build a future brighter than any single species could imagine." I turned to Simmons, a smile playing on my transformed features. "So, partner, ready to help shape the next chapter of Earth's history?" He shook his head, a wry grin breaking through his concern. "Do I have a choice?" I laughed, the sound a perfect harmony of human and insect tones. "There's always a choice, Simmons. That's what makes us who we are." As we made our way out of the crucible, I felt a sense of profound peace settle over me. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges to face, prejudices to overcome, and wonders to discover. But for the first time since this all began, I knew with absolute certainty that we were on the right path. Human and insect, individual and collective, together we would reach for the stars and beyond. The metamorphosis was complete, and our true journey was just beginning.